Hello friends. About 70% of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be really happy if you do so. Also, don't forget to hit the like button and leave your comments. Your interaction makes the content reach everyone and contributes to the growth of the channel. Thank you all. I remember that trip like it was yesterday. Not because it was the most beautiful place I'd ever been, but because it changed everything for me. I don't hike anymore, not since that weekend in 1998. And I definitely don't trust people the same way I used to. It started as a simple idea, one of those last-minute decisions you make when you're tired of the same old routine. I had a long weekend, and I hadn't taken any time for myself in months. A hike seemed perfect. Fresh air, trees, quiet. I needed it. My plan was to drive up to the Cascade Mountains, spend 3 days on the trail, and come back feeling like a new person. That was the plan, anyway. I packed light. A tent, sleeping bag, some canned food, and a few bottles of water. My destination was a less traveled route called Gray Slope Ridge. It wasn't too far from the more popular trails, but just remote enough that it never saw much foot traffic. Perfect for getting away from everything. The drive up was uneventful, just me and my old truck bouncing along the dirt roads surrounded by pine trees that stretched up like green spears into the sky. I reached the trailhead around noon, parked my truck, and set off with a sense of excitement. The air was crisp, the kind that fills your lungs and makes you feel like you could keep walking forever. About 4 hours into the hike, I came across something strange. There was this old rusted-out car just off the side of the trail, hidden partially by overgrowth. It was one of those 70s sedans, the kind with big chrome bumpers and heavy metal doors. It looked like it had been there for years, maybe decades. There was no road nearby and no obvious reason why a car would be out here in the middle of nowhere. The whole scene felt off, but I shrugged it off. Weird things happen in the woods. People get lost, abandon their cars, and move on. It didn't seem worth worrying about. I kept hiking until dusk. I found a spot just off the trail to set up camp near a small creek. As I was pitching my tent, I noticed that it was eerily quiet. No birds, no wind rustling through the trees. Not even the distant hum of insects. It was as if the forest was holding its breath. But again, I brushed it off. Being alone out in nature can do strange things to your mind. After dinner, I climbed into my sleeping bag and drifted off. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to a sound. It was faint, almost like whispering, but not quite. More like murmuring. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but as I listened closer, it didn't sound natural. It was too rhythmic, too purposeful. I told myself it was just the forest playing tricks on me. You hear things when you're alone in the dark, right? The next day, I decided to hike a little farther off the trail. There were supposed to be some great views from the ridge, and I wanted to see them before heading back. The weather was perfect, the kind of bright, crisp day you dream about when you're stuck in an office. But something felt off. The trees seemed wrong somehow. I can't explain it. It was like they were leaning in just a little too much, like they were closing in on me. About midday, I found something else. It was an old cabin, half collapsed and overgrown with vines. There wasn't any indication it had been used recently. No footprints, no tire tracks, nothing. The place looked like it had been abandoned for years. I walked closer, curiosity getting the better of me. I didn't expect to find anything, maybe just some old tools or furniture left behind. But what I found made my skin crawl. Inside, there were these strange markings all over the walls carved into the wood. They weren't letters or symbols I recognized, just jagged lines and shapes that didn't make any sense. And there were bones, animal bones mostly, scattered on the floor. But then I saw something else, something worse. In the corner of the cabin, half buried under debris, was a human skull. I froze. It didn't make sense. How could this be here? And why had no one reported it? I backed out of the cabin, my heart pounding, and decided right then and there to head back to my truck. I wasn't about to wait around to find out who or what had left that skull there. I was maybe 2 hours into my hike back when I heard it again, the murmuring. This time it was louder, closer. It sounded like it was coming from all around me, as if the trees themselves were whispering. I picked up my pace, telling myself it was just my imagination, that I was letting my nerves get the better of me. Then I heard footsteps. Not mine, someone else's. I stopped dead in my tracks and turned around. No one was there, but the footsteps didn't stop. They were steady, deliberate, coming closer. Panic set in. I broke into a run, crashing through the underbrush, not caring about the noise I was making. I just needed to get out of there. But the footsteps followed. They weren't running, just walking, calmly, like whoever or whatever it was knew exactly where I was going. I didn't stop until I reached a small clearing, panting, hands on my knees, trying to catch my breath. That's when I saw him. At the edge of the clearing stood a man, tall and thin, with clothes that looked like they hadn't been changed in weeks, maybe months. His face was gaunt, sunken in like he hadn't eaten in days. But it was his eyes that really got me. They were hollow, empty, like there was nothing behind them, no soul, no humanity. He just stood there watching me, his head tilted slightly to one side. He didn't say anything, didn't move. He just stared. I shouted at him, something, I don't even remember what, but he didn't respond. He just smiled, this thin, crooked smile that made my blood run cold. Then without a word he turned and walked back into the trees. I didn't wait to see where he went. I bolted, running as fast as I could toward the trail. The sun was setting and I didn't want to be out there after dark. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting him to be right behind me. But he wasn't. When I finally reached my truck, I felt this overwhelming sense of relief. I jumped in, started the engine, and peeled out of there like my life depended on it. But as I drove down the winding dirt road, something caught my eye. In my rearview mirror, I saw him again, standing at the edge of the forest, watching me. His smile was gone, replaced by something else, something darker. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. I didn't stop driving until I was back in town, my hands shaking on the wheel. I wanted to go to the police to tell them what I'd seen, but what was I going to say? That I'd found a skull in an old cabin and a creepy guy had followed me? It didn't seem real, even to me. So I kept quiet. I tried to move on, to forget about it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, watching, waiting. A few weeks later, I saw a news report. A hiker had gone missing in the same area. They never found his body, just his tent abandoned by the trail. The authorities said it was probably an accident, that he'd gotten lost or hurt and couldn't make it out. But I knew better. I never went back to the mountains after that. I couldn't. Whatever was out there, whatever I'd seen, it wasn't finished, not yet. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear that murmuring in the back of my mind, like it's calling me back, daring me to return. But I won't, not ever. The experience changed me in ways I'm still trying to understand. I became more cautious, more skeptical of the world around me. I started to notice things I'd never paid attention to before, the way people looked at each other, the subtle shifts in their expressions, the hidden meanings behind their words. I threw myself into my work, trying to keep busy, to keep my mind off what had happened. But it was always there, lurking in the background. I'd catch myself staring out the window, wondering if he was out there somewhere watching me. I started researching the area, digging through old newspaper archives and local history books. I found stories, legends really, about people going missing in those mountains. Some dating back decades, even centuries. Most were written off as accidents or animal attacks, but there was always something that didn't quite add up. I reached out to other hikers, people who'd been to Gray Slope Ridge. Most had nothing unusual to report, but a few had stories. They talked about feeling watched, about hearing strange noises in the night. One guy swore he'd seen someone or something moving through the trees, just at the edge of his vision. I started to piece together a pattern. The disappearances, the sightings, they all seemed to cluster around certain times of the year. The fall equinox, the winter solstice, dates that had significance in ancient cultures. But the more I dug, the more questions I had. Who was that man in the woods? Was he connected to the skull I found? And what about those markings in the cabin? What did they mean? I became obsessed, spending hours poring over maps, cross-referencing dates and locations. I started to see connections everywhere, even in places where there probably weren't any. My friends worried about me, said I was becoming paranoid. Maybe they were right, but I couldn't let it go. I felt like I was on the edge of uncovering something big, something important. But every time I thought I was getting close, the trail would go cold. I started having nightmares. I'd be back in those woods running from something I couldn't see. I'd hear that murmuring again, louder this time, almost like words but in a language I couldn't understand. And always I'd see those eyes, hollow and empty, watching me from the darkness. I tried therapy, tried medication, but nothing seemed to help. The dreams, the fear, they were always there, just below the surface. Years passed. I moved away, trying to put some distance between myself and those mountains. But no matter where I went, I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being followed, that something was waiting for me to let my guard down. I'd see news reports about hikers going missing, about strange sightings in remote areas, and I'd wonder, was it happening elsewhere too? Was whatever I'd encountered in those woods spreading? I started connecting with others who'd had similar experiences. We formed a sort of support group, sharing our stories, our theories. Some thought it was all coincidence, just the result of overactive imaginations and the inherent dangers of the wilderness. Others had wilder ideas, government conspiracies, supernatural entities, things I couldn't bring myself to believe. But as I listened to their stories, I started to see patterns. The same themes kept coming up: the feeling of being watched, the strange markings, the sense that the forest itself was alive and hostile. I began to wonder if what I'd experienced was part of something larger, something that had been going on for far longer than I'd realized. Maybe those ancient legends weren't just stories. Maybe there was some truth to them, some warning that we'd forgotten or ignored. I found myself drawn back to the mountains, not physically but mentally. I'd spend hours studying satellite images, looking for anything unusual. I'd track weather patterns, lunar cycles, anything that might give me a clue. And then, about 5 years after my encounter, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A news article about a forest fire in the Cascades, near Grayslope Ridge. The fire had revealed something, the foundations of an old settlement, one that predated any known European exploration of the area. Archaeologists were baffled. The structures didn't match any known Native American building techniques, and there were markings carved into stone pillars. Markings that looked eerily similar to what I'd seen in that old cabin. I wanted to go back, to see for myself. But I couldn't. The fear was still too strong. Instead, I reached out to the archaeologists, sharing what I knew, what I'd seen. Most dismissed me as a crackpot, but a few listened. They asked questions, seemed genuinely interested. For a while I thought maybe this was it. Maybe this would be the key to understanding what had happened to me, what was still happening in those mountains. But then, just as suddenly as it had started, the whole thing was shut down. The site was closed off, declared too dangerous due to potential landslides. I tried to follow up to find out what had happened, but I hit wall after wall. The archaeologists I'd spoken to suddenly couldn't be reached. The news articles about the discovery disappeared from the internet. It was like it had never happened. And that's when I realized, whatever was out there, whatever I'd stumbled upon, it was bigger than I'd ever imagined. There were forces at work that didn't want this discovered, didn't want the truth to come out. I backed off after that. I stopped my research, stopped reaching out to others. I tried to convince myself that it was all in my head, that I was seeing patterns where there were none. But deep down, I knew. I knew that what I'd seen was real, and that it was still out there. Now, years later, I still can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. Every time I see a news report about a missing hiker, every time I hear about strange sightings in the wilderness, I wonder, is it happening again? Is it spreading? I don't have answers. I don't know if I ever will, but I know this. There's something out there in those woods, something old and patient and dangerous. And it's waiting. Waiting for people like me, people who stumble into its domain, unaware of the ancient forces they're dealing with. So I stay away from the mountains now. I avoid the forests, the wild places, and I warn others when I can, tell them to be careful, to trust their instincts, because sometimes the legends are true, sometimes the monsters are real, and sometimes they're watching us from just beyond the tree line, waiting for their chance to strike. I've always been drawn to nature, feeling a strange pull towards the wild. The city never appealed to me. Too many people, too many prying eyes. But out there in the forests and on the trails, I found a sense of freedom that I couldn't experience anywhere else. Little did I know that this freedom would come at a steep price, one that I could never have anticipated. It was the summer of 1996, a few years before I settled down and attempted to leave my wandering days behind. I was in my early 30s then, not exactly a seasoned outdoorsman, but I had done my fair share of solo treks. That summer I decided to challenge myself with something more remote and demanding. I had heard whispers about the Blackstone Forest, nestled deep in the Appalachian Mountains in a secluded part of West Virginia, where even the locals seemed uneasy discussing it. Like many places in the Appalachians, Blackstone had its share of stories. Some were charming, others chilling, but Blackstone's reputation was different, darker somehow. It wasn't the kind of place you'd find in tourist brochures. The locals spoke of strange disappearances, of people vanishing into thin air, only to reappear years later, if at all. I dismissed these tales as mere campfire ghost stories, the kind of local folklore that every remote area seems to accumulate. My world was grounded in practicality and reality. Or so I thought. I set out on a Friday morning in early July. My plan was rough but ambitious. A week in the woods, hiking the less traveled paths, exploring parts of the forest that most people overlooked or avoided. I packed light but prepared, bringing enough essentials to survive if things went awry. The first couple of days were uneventful, exactly what I had hoped for. It was just me, the trees, and the occasional rustle of wildlife. The trail I followed had grown faint, almost as if no one had walked it in years. But that suited me fine. I was seeking solitude after all. By the third night I had found a small clearing to set up camp. It wasn't ideal, but the sky was clear, and I could see stars twinkling through gaps in the canopy. I remember feeling an odd sense of calm which, in hindsight, should have been the first warning sign. In places like Blackstone, calm rarely lasts. It was around midnight when I first heard it. A low, droning sound, like wind rushing through a narrow pass, but the air was still. I sat up in my tent, straining to listen. The noise wasn't constant. It pulsed, seeming to come from deep within the woods. At first I rationalized it as an animal or perhaps a distant storm. I tried to sleep, but the sound persisted. After about an hour of restless tossing and turning, curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The forest around my camp was dense, but something felt wrong that night. I can't explain it precisely, but the trees seemed to lean in closer as if eavesdropping. The air had a strange weight to it, thicker and harder to breathe. I stood still, shining my light into the darkness, listening for the sound again. But there was only silence now, an oppressive kind of silence, the kind that makes your skin crawl. Then I heard the snap of a twig. I swung the flashlight around, scanning the tree line. Nothing. But I could feel something watching me. I know how that sounds, but it's the only way to describe it. I wasn't alone out there, and whatever was with me wasn't a deer or a bear. It was smarter than that, quieter. I told myself to stay calm, that I was being paranoid, but the hairs on the back of my neck told a different story. I retreated to my tent, zipped it up, and sat with my back against the wall, gripping my flashlight like a lifeline. I must have dozed off at some point because the next thing I remember is waking up to the sound of rustling outside. It was faint, like something moving through the underbrush, but close enough that I couldn't ignore it. I stayed quiet, listening. The rustling grew louder, more deliberate, and then stopped right outside my tent. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. Whatever was out there was waiting, listening just like I was. The seconds stretched into minutes, and then in a heartbeat, the side of the tent collapsed inward, as if something heavy had brushed against it. My heart nearly exploded out of my chest, but I remained still. My brain was screaming at me to run, to get the hell out of there, but my body was frozen in place. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the pressure lifted. I could hear the rustling again, moving away this time, back into the forest. It was only then that I realized I had been holding my breath. I gasped for air, feeling like I'd just escaped death, but I wasn't sure what death would have looked like out there. Not yet. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. As soon as the first light of dawn crept through the trees, I packed up and got moving. I wasn't foolish enough to stay another night in that clearing. I figured I could find a better spot further down the trail, closer to the river I knew ran through this part of the forest. The hike was grueling. Steep inclines, uneven ground, dense underbrush that seemed to grab at my legs with every step. But the movement helped settle my nerves. By noon, I'd reached a small creek where I decided to rest and refill my water bottles. That's when I noticed something strange in the mud along the bank. Footprints, human footprints, but they weren't fresh. They were partially washed away by the creek, but they were unmistakably there, leading into the woods. At first I thought maybe some other hiker had passed through here recently, but then I noticed how old they looked, and then it hit me. There were no other tracks, no signs of anyone coming back. Just a single set of prints disappearing into the trees. I followed them. I don't know why. Maybe I was still chasing whatever had spooked me the night before. Maybe I just needed to know. The tracks led deeper into the forest, far from any trail I recognized. The further I went, the darker the woods became, as if the sunlight couldn't reach here. After what felt like an hour, the footprints disappeared completely, swallowed up by the undergrowth. And that's when I found the cabin. It was small, barely more than a shack, half hidden by vines and moss. The wood was rotting, and the roof sagged dangerously. I didn't want to go inside, but something pushed me toward it. Maybe it was that same curiosity that had gotten me into trouble the night before. Maybe I just needed answers. The door creaked open with a single push, and the smell hit me first, damp, decaying wood and something else, something rancid. Inside, the cabin was empty, save for a single wooden chair in the center of the room facing the doorway. On the floor beside the chair was a small pile of bones, animal bones from the looks of it, but I couldn't be sure. The air was thick with rot, and yet there was something oddly fresh about it, as if the decay had been recent. I backed out of the cabin slowly, my mind racing. This wasn't some abandoned shelter. Someone had been here. Someone or something was still here. As I turned to leave, I saw something hanging from the trees just beyond the cabin, swinging gently in the breeze. It was a body. I froze, my blood turning to ice. It was a man, or what was left of one. He was hanging by his neck, his body bloated and blackened from exposure. I didn't need to get closer to know he was dead, long dead. But there was something about his face, or what remained of it, that looked familiar. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had seen him before. Maybe on a missing persons flyer, maybe on the news. I didn't stick around to figure it out. I ran. I don't know how long I ran, but by the time I stopped, the sun was beginning to set, and I was completely lost. The woods were quiet again, too quiet. I felt the weight of that silence pressing down on me, choking me, and then I heard it, the same droning sound from the night before, pulsing through the trees. It was closer now, so close I could feel it vibrating in my bones. I kept moving, trying to put as much distance between me and that sound as possible, but no matter how fast I went, it was always there, always behind me. I stumbled through the forest, tripping over roots and rocks, barely able to see in the fading light. And then I saw something in the distance, another figure, standing still in the shadows. It wasn't the man I had seen hanging from the tree. This one was different, taller, thinner, almost skeletal in its appearance. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, just watched me as I approached. I felt a surge of terror, but also something else, something like recognition. As I got closer, I realized why it looked familiar. It was me. Or rather, it was what I would look like if I had been out here for years, starving, exposed to the elements. Its skin was pulled tight over its bones, its eyes sunken and lifeless. But they were my eyes, staring back at me with a mixture of hunger and desperation. I turned and ran again, faster than I thought possible. Branches whipped at my face, thorns tore at my clothes, but I didn't slow down. I could hear something behind me now. Not just the droning sound, but footsteps, heavy and fast. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I don't know how long I ran or how far. My lungs were burning. My legs felt like lead. But eventually I broke through the tree line and found myself on a dirt road. I collapsed, gasping for air, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. As I lay there, trying to catch my breath, I heard a car approaching. I managed to pull myself to my feet and flag it down. The driver, an older man in a pickup truck, looked at me with a mixture of concern and suspicion. I must have been a sight, clothes torn, covered in dirt and scratches, wild-eyed and panting. "You okay, son?" he asked, rolling down his window. I shook my head, still struggling to speak. I was lost in the woods. Blackstone Forest, I don't know what I saw." The old man's expression changed from concern to something like fear. "Blackstone? You shouldn't go in there. Folks go missing in those woods. Come on, get in. I'll take you to town." As we drove, I tried to explain what had happened, but the words sounded crazy even to my own ears. The old man listened silently, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You're not the first," he said finally. "People have been seeing things in those woods for years, things that ain't natural. Most folks don't come back out. You're lucky." We reached the small town of Millbrook as night was falling. The old man dropped me off at the local motel, refusing any payment for the ride. "Just stay out of those woods," he said as he drove away. I spent the night in the motel, unable to sleep, jumping at every sound. The next morning I went to the local police station to report what I had seen. The officer listened to my story with a blank expression, then told me they'd look into it. But I could tell from his tone that he didn't believe me, that he'd heard stories like this before. I stayed in Millbrook for a few days trying to gather information about Blackstone Forest. The locals were tight-lipped, but I managed to piece together bits and pieces. There had been disappearances over the years, hikers and campers who went into the woods and never came out. Some had been found, weeks or months later, but they were never the same. They spoke of things in the forest, things that shouldn't exist. As I dug deeper, I found old newspaper clippings, reports of strange lights in the sky above Blackstone, of unexplained phenomena dating back decades, but nothing concrete, nothing that could explain what I had seen. After a week, I left Millbrook. I couldn't stay there, couldn't bear the weight of the forest looming on the horizon, but I couldn't go home either. What I had seen, what I had experienced, had changed me. I spent the next few months drifting from town to town, always looking over my shoulder, always feeling like something was watching me. I tried to put it behind me, to forget about Blackstone and what had happened there. But the memories haunted me. The sound of that droning noise would wake me up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat. I'd see shadows moving in the corner of my eye, only to find nothing when I turned to look. It's been years now since that summer in Blackstone Forest. I've tried to move on, to build a normal life. But I know that what I experienced was real. I know that there are things out there in the dark corners of the world that defy explanation. And I know that someday, somehow, I'll have to go back. Because whatever is in Blackstone Forest is still there, waiting. And I'm the only one who knows the truth. Sometimes late at night, I can still hear that droning sound, feel that presence watching me. And I wonder if maybe, just maybe, I never really left those woods at all. Maybe a part of me is still there, wandering through the endless trees, searching for a way out that doesn't exist. And maybe someday I'll find my way back to that cabin, to that figure in the woods that looked so much like me. And then perhaps I'll finally understand what really happened in Blackstone Forest. But until then, I'll keep moving, keep running, because I know that if I stop, if I let my guard down for even a moment, whatever is out there in those woods might finally catch up to me. And I'm not sure I'm ready to face what that might mean. So I keep going day after day, haunted by memories of a place that shouldn't exist, and experiences that defy explanation, because in the end that's all I can do. Keep moving, keep searching for answers, and hope that someday I'll find a way to make peace with what happened in Blackstone Forest. But deep down, I know the truth. Some mysteries are better left unsolved, some doors better left unopened. And Blackstone Forest, that's a door that, once opened, can never truly be closed again. It was July 15th, 2023, when we set out on what was supposed to be a thrilling adventure into the heart of the Appalachian wilderness. I'm Hal, short for Halton, and at 28 years old, I thought I'd seen it all. boy, was I wrong. The sun was just starting to peek over the tree line when we loaded up my old Ford F-150 for the trip. I'd been planning this hike for months, just me and 3 of my closest buddies, heading way out into the woods where no one could find us unless they had a map and the will to follow it. And it wasn't just any forest either. We were headed to a place deep in the Appalachians, where people whispered about disappearances and weird stories that no one could ever explain. None of us really believed that crap, of course. We were just 4 guys looking for a thrill, a break from the monotony of our 9-to-5 lives. I was driving as usual, with Janek riding shotgun. Janek had some kind of Eastern European lineage and was always spouting conspiracy theories. In the back were Gabe and Benji. Gabe was short and wiry, always cracking jokes to lighten the mood. Benji was the most level-headed, the calmest of us, and probably the only reason we hadn't gotten arrested on any of our previous trips. As we drove, the cityscape gradually gave way to rolling hills and dense forests. The anticipation was palpable in the truck, a mix of excitement and nervous energy. We'd done plenty of camping trips before, but this one felt different. Maybe it was the stories we'd heard, or maybe it was just the knowledge that we were heading somewhere truly remote. It was Benji who first heard about the place. We were at our local bar, O'Malley's, about 2 months ago when he overheard a conversation between 2 older guys at the next table. They were talking in hushed tones about some obscure trail that wasn't on any official map. Benji, being the curious type, couldn't help but eavesdrop. One of the men, a local from a nearby town, was telling his friend about a trail that supposedly led to a cabin built sometime in the 1960s, way up in the mountains. The thing was, no one could ever agree on where exactly it was. Some said it was just a legend, a story passed down through generations of hikers and hunters. Others claimed they'd been there but couldn't find their way back. And a few, the ones who'd had a few too many beers usually, swore that people who went looking for it never returned. Naturally, we decided we had to find it. We spent the next couple of months planning, gathering supplies, and trying to piece together the location from the fragments of information Benji had overheard. We pored over topographical maps, scoured online forums for any mention of the mysterious cabin, and even tried to track down the local guy from the bar. No luck on that last one. Seems he was just passing through town. By the time we parked the truck at what we hoped was the right trailhead, it was already mid-morning. The air was thick with humidity, and the forest around us buzzed with the sounds of insects and birdsong. We double-checked our gear one last time before shouldering our packs. "You sure this is the right place?" Gabe asked, eyeing the overgrown path skeptically. I shrugged. "As sure as we can be. This matches the description from that forum post at least." Janek was practically vibrating with excitement. "Guys, do you realize what this could mean if we actually find it? We could be the ones to solve a decades-old mystery." Benji, ever the voice of reason, chimed in. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Right now, let's just focus on not getting lost." With that, we set off down the trail. At first, it wasn't anything special, just your typical Appalachian woods. Towering oaks and maples created a dense canopy overhead, dappling the forest floor with patches of sunlight. We saw the occasional deer darting between trees, and the distant sound of a stream kept us company as we hiked. We were all carrying enough gear to last the weekend: tents, sleeping bags, plenty of food and water, and a couple of flasks of whiskey for good measure. Benji had also brought his hunting rifle, a decision that had sparked some debate during our planning sessions. He'd argued that it was just a precaution, in case we ran into any aggressive wildlife. The rest of us had eventually agreed, figuring the worst we'd run into would be a black bear. No big deal, right? We hiked for a good 5 or 6 hours, taking breaks here and there to rest and rehydrate. The conversation flowed easily, ranging from work complaints to relationship drama to wild speculations about what we might find at the end of our journey. "I bet it's some old moonshiner's hideout," Gabe joked during one of our breaks. "We'll find a still and enough white lightning to blind us all." "Nah," Janek countered, his eyes gleaming with that look he got when he was about to launch into one of his theories. "I think it's something bigger. Maybe it's some kind of government facility, like where they do experiments or hide aliens or something." We all laughed at that, but there was an undercurrent of tension to our mirth. As the day wore on and we pushed deeper into the wilderness, things started to change. The forest grew denser, the trees older and more gnarled. The underbrush became thicker, making our progress slower and more difficult. But it wasn't just the physical landscape that shifted. There was something else, something that set my nerves on edge. It took me a while to put my finger on it, but eventually I realized what it was. The forest had gone quiet. No more birdsong, no rustling in the underbrush. Even the wind seemed to have died down, leaving us in an eerie stillness. "That's weird," Janek muttered, looking around like he expected something to jump out at him. I tried to wave it off. "It's just your imagination, man. The forest gets quiet sometimes." But it wasn't just that. It was like the whole world had decided to hold its breath, waiting for something. Even Gabe, who never shut up, was unusually quiet. "Hal," Benji said after a while, his voice low, "we should set up camp soon. We're running out of daylight." He was right. The sun was already dipping behind the ridge, casting long, creepy shadows between the trees. We found a decent spot by a small clearing and set about setting up camp. By the time we had the tents pitched and a fire going, it was nearly dark. That's when things really started to feel off. It wasn't just the quiet anymore. There was this feeling that settled over us, like we weren't alone, like something was watching us. Not in the typical forest creature's way either. No, this was different, unnerving. "Anyone else feel that?" Gabe finally broke the silence, his eyes darting around the flickering firelight. Benji just nodded, his hand resting on the rifle by his side. Janek didn't say anything, but I could see him fiddling nervously with the strap of his backpack. I wasn't going to admit it, but yeah, something felt wrong. The shadows beyond our campfire seemed deeper, more menacing. Every snap of a twig in the darkness made us all jump. "Well," I said, trying to keep things light, "maybe we've just been out here too long. Forest does weird stuff to your head when it gets dark." "Or maybe," Janek said quietly, "it's the cabin." None of us laughed. We ate our dinner in relative silence, the crackling fire the only thing breaking it up. Then after a while, Janek stood up. "I gotta take a piss," he muttered and wandered off into the trees. We waited for him to come back. 10 minutes passed, then 15. "Think he got lost?" Gabe asked, half joking but clearly nervous. "He wouldn't go far," I said, standing up. "I'll go check." I grabbed my flashlight and headed into the trees, calling his name. "Janek, you good, man?" Nothing, just more of that damn silence. I walked further, the beam of my light cutting through the thick underbrush, but there was no sign of him. Just as I was about to turn back, I saw something. A faint glow in the distance, like the reflection of moonlight on something metal. Curious, I moved closer. That's when I saw it. A truck. An old, rusted-out truck, half covered in moss and leaves, parked in the middle of nowhere. "What the hell?" I called out for Janek again, but my voice just echoed back at me, swallowed by the trees. I backed up, ready to head back to camp, when I saw it. A flash of movement from behind the truck. I froze, staring into the darkness, but there was nothing. That's when I heard the scream. Janek's scream. I bolted back toward the camp, my heart pounding in my chest. By the time I got there, Gabe and Benji were already on their feet, wide-eyed. "What the hell happened?" Gabe shouted. I don't know," I stammered. I heard him scream, but I didn't see anything. Benji grabbed his rifle and started toward the trees. "We're not leaving him out there. Let's go." We moved together, our flashlights cutting through the night. It wasn't long before we found something that made my stomach churn. It was Janek's hat, lying on the ground, torn. "Shit," Benji muttered, looking around, his grip tight on the rifle. "We need to get out of here," Gabe whispered, panic edging into his voice. "We're not alone out here." "Not without Janek," Benji growled. "We're not leaving him." We pressed on, calling his name. That's when I saw it, a figure standing in the trees. At first I thought it was Janek, but as we got closer I realized it wasn't him at all. It was a man, an old man, with wild, tangled hair and dirty clothes, staring at us with wide, unblinking eyes. He didn't move, just stood there watching. "Who the hell are you?" I called out, my voice trembling. He didn't answer, didn't move, just kept staring. Benji raised his rifle. "Stay where you are, old man." That's when the man grinned, a wide, twisted grin that sent a chill down my spine. Suddenly he bolted into the trees, disappearing into the darkness. "What the?" Gabe started, but he was cut off by another scream. This time it was closer. Too close. We ran, crashing through the underbrush, desperate to find Yannick. But when we reached the source of the scream, all we found was blood. A lot of it. It was smeared across the ground, leading deeper into the forest. Benji cursed under his breath, gripping his rifle like a lifeline. "We need to get out of here," I said, my voice shaking. "Now." But Benji wasn't listening. He was staring at the blood, his face pale. "Benji, come on," I shouted, grabbing his arm. Reluctantly, he nodded, and we turned to leave, only to find the old man standing right behind us, that same twisted grin on his face. He didn't say a word, didn't move, just grinned. And then, without warning, he lunged. Benji fired the rifle, the sound deafening in the stillness of the forest. The old man went down, but it didn't stop him. He kept crawling toward us, his fingers clawing at the dirt, that damn grin never leaving his face. "Run!" Benji shouted, firing again. We didn't need to be told twice. We bolted, leaving the old man behind, his eerie laughter echoing through the trees. We ran blindly through the forest, branches whipping at our faces, roots threatening to trip us at every step. I could hear Gabe's panicked breathing behind me, and Benji's occasional curses as he brought up the rear. I don't know how long we ran. It could have been minutes or hours. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that dark, twisted forest. Every tree looked the same, every shadow held the potential for danger. More than once I thought I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, darting figures just beyond the reach of our flashlights, always staying just out of sight. Finally, we burst out of the tree line and found ourselves back at the clearing where we'd set up camp. Our tents were still there, looking eerily undisturbed in the pale moonlight. We paused for a moment, all of us bent over, gasping for breath. What the hell was that thing?" Gabe panted, his eyes wide with fear. Benji shook his head, still gripping his rifle tightly. "I don't know, but we need to get out of here, now." "But what about Yannick?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. The amount of blood we'd seen, there was no way. "We can't help him now," Benji said grimly. "We need to save ourselves." We quickly gathered what we could from the campsite, leaving the tents behind, in our haste. As we were about to leave, I heard something that made my blood run cold. The sound of twigs snapping, coming from the direction we'd just fled. "Go, go, go," I hissed, and we took off running again, this time heading in what we hoped was the direction of the truck. The forest seemed to be actively working against us now. Branches reached out to snag our clothes, roots rose up to trip us, and the darkness pressed in from all sides, threatening to swallow us whole. And all the while I could swear I heard that eerie laughter echoing through the trees, sometimes close, sometimes far away, but always there. By the time we made it back to the truck, it was nearly dawn. The sky was just beginning to lighten, turning from inky black to a deep, bruised purple. We bolted for the vehicle, hearts pounding and lungs burning. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip them. Benji yanked open the passenger door, and Gabe, pale and silent, slid into the back seat without a word. Just as I was about to climb in, I saw something that made my heart stop. There, at the edge of the clearing, stood the old man. He was too far away to make out clearly in the pre-dawn light, but I could see that twisted grin, those unblinking eyes fixed on us. I floored it the moment I got the engine started, not caring about the rough terrain or the bumps. We didn't say a damn thing as we tore down the narrow dirt road, the forest finally falling away behind us. We drove straight to the nearest town, a small place called Millerton. It was just starting to wake up as we rolled in, looking like we'd been through hell, which, in a way, I suppose we had. Benji took out his phone, dialing the police with shaking hands. We waited in the parking lot of a small diner, all of us staring straight ahead, breathing heavily in the stale air of the truck. When the police arrived, they asked a lot of questions, but we couldn't answer most of them. How could we explain what we'd seen? Who would believe us? They sent out search parties, of course, but Yannick wasn't found. Neither was the old man or any evidence of what had happened to us that night. The official report chalked it up to a tragic hiking accident, possibly involving local wildlife. But we knew the truth. We'd seen something that night, something that shouldn't exist in our rational, modern world, something that still haunts my nightmares. We never went camping again after that. How could we? The wilderness had shown us its true face, and it was far more terrifying than any of us could have imagined. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls outside my window, I think I can hear that eerie laughter again, and I wonder, is it just my imagination, or is there something out there, watching, waiting for its next victims to wander into its domain? I don't know if I'll ever have the answers, but one thing's for certain, I'll never set foot in those woods again. Some mysteries, I've learned, are better left unsolved. It was the summer of 1995, and we were just a bunch of high school buddies, you know? The kind that had grown up in the same small town, done the same stupid things, gotten into the same kind of trouble. We were all 17, teetering on the edge of adulthood but still clinging to the invincibility of youth. And then there was that one trip, that one hiking trip that changed everything. There were 4 of us, me, Alex, Jack, Paul, and Luke. We'd been planning this weekend hiking trip for months. Nothing fancy, just a few days out in the middle of nowhere, a remote forest up in the Appalachians, somewhere off the grid. The idea was simple: unplug, unwind, drink some beers around a fire, and maybe catch a fish or two. What we didn't know was that this place had its own secrets, old ones that had been waiting for us. We left town early on a Friday morning, packed up in Luke's dad's rusty old pickup. The drive out there took forever. 2 hours in, we lost cell service. Another hour and the road started to get narrower, more winding. The GPS cut out, but Luke swore he knew where we were going. I wasn't so sure. "Dude, are you sure this is the right way?" I asked, peering out the window at the endless sea of trees. Luke just grinned, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Trust me, man, my cousin came out here last year, said it was the best camping spot he'd ever found." Paul leaned forward from the back seat, his voice tinged with excitement. "Yeah, and how many times has your cousin gotten lost in his own backyard?" We all laughed, the sound echoing in the cab of the truck. It was easy to laugh then, when the world still made sense. The trailhead was nothing more than a dirt patch on the side of the road. No signs, no markers, just the start of a path disappearing into the trees. It was perfect, or so we thought. Paul cracked a joke about it being prime horror movie material, but we laughed it off. We were young, stupid, and full of energy. Nothing could touch us. As we shouldered our backpacks and started down the trail, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The forest was quiet, too quiet. I mean, sure, forests are supposed to be peaceful, but this place, it was like the trees were listening. There was no wind, no birds, just the sound of our boots crunching through the leaves. "Hey guys," I said, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. "Is it just me, or is it really quiet out here?" Jack glanced around, his brow furrowed. "Now that you mention it, yeah, it's pretty dead. Weird." Luke just shrugged. "Probably just means we're the only idiots out here. More beer for us, right?" We all chuckled, but it sounded forced. Still, none of us said anything more about it. We just kept walking, pushing deeper into the forest. We set up camp just before sundown near a small creek, the kind of spot that looked untouched by humans. As the last rays of sunlight filtered through the trees, we got a fire going and cracked open our first beers. That night the fire was warm, the beer was cold, and the conversation flowed easy. We told old stories, laughed too loud, and I swear I could hear my own voice echoing back from the woods. But again, no one mentioned it. The forest, it seemed, had a way of swallowing up the sound, making it feel like we were the only people left on Earth. "Remember that time we snuck into Old Man Johnson's orchard?" Jack said, wiping tears of laughter from his eyes. "And Paul got his pants caught on the fence?" Paul groaned, but he was grinning. "Don't remind me. I still have the scar from where I ripped them off." We all howled with laughter, the sound echoing through the trees. For a moment it felt like we were back home, like this was just another night hanging out in someone's backyard. But then the laughter died down, and the silence of the forest crept back in. It was sometime around midnight when things started to feel off. Jack, always the jokester, was the first to say it. "Hey, did you guys hear that?" he asked, his voice low. We all went quiet, straining to listen. Nothing. "Dude, you're just drunk," Paul laughed. but there was a nervous edge to it. Jack wasn't convinced. "No, seriously, listen. It's like footsteps or something." I rolled my eyes, but then I heard it too. Faint but steady, like someone or something was moving through the trees. Not close, but not far either. We brushed it off as an animal, probably a deer, maybe a bear. Luke even grabbed his flashlight and swept it through the woods, but the light didn't catch anything. We all joked about it, but the fire seemed a little less comforting after that. Eventually we called it a night, crawling into our tents with uneasy laughs and half-hearted jokes about axe murderers and Bigfoot. As I zipped up my sleeping bag, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us from the darkness beyond our campfire. I don't know how long I'd been asleep when I heard it. A snap, like a branch breaking underfoot. I sat up, heart racing. The fire had burned down to embers, casting long shadows around the campsite. I looked around, trying to calm myself. Everyone else was still asleep except for Jack. His sleeping bag was empty. "Jack?" I whispered, but there was no answer. I stood up, grabbed the flashlight, and walked to the edge of the camp. I called his name again, louder this time. Still nothing. My stomach turned with a strange mix of annoyance and worry. He was probably off taking a piss or messing with us. Typical Jack. I was about to head back to my tent when I heard it again. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from deeper in the woods. My skin crawled. This wasn't the kind of sound an animal made. It was too measured, too intentional. I called for Jack again, louder now. This time Paul and Luke stirred awake. "What's going on?" Luke muttered, rubbing his eyes. "Jack's gone," I said, my voice tight. "I think he went into the woods." Paul sat up, his face half-shadowed by the dying fire. Why the hell would he do that? Before I could answer, there was a rustling sound from the trees, followed by a sharp, almost metallic click. We all froze. It wasn't a natural sound, not from the forest. "Jack!" I called again, my voice cracking. Then suddenly Jack appeared at the edge of the campsite, stumbling into the light. His face was pale, his eyes wide, his clothes were torn, and there was a streak of blood running down his arm. "Run," he gasped, barely able to get the word out. "Just run." None of us moved. We were too shocked, too confused. Jack collapsed to his knees, breathing hard. Before we could even process what was happening, he started sobbing, clutching his side. His shirt was soaked with blood. Luke rushed to his side, trying to pull up his shirt to see the wound, but Jack pushed him away, frantically shaking his head. "No, no, he's out there," Jack whispered, his voice breaking. "He's coming for us." Paul and I exchanged a glance, both of us silently asking the same question. "Who?" Before we could ask, Jack let out a sharp, strangled cry. He pointed into the woods, his hand trembling. We all looked, and that's when we saw him. At first it was just a shape, tall, thin, almost skeletal. He stood at the edge of the light, watching us. His face, God, I'll never forget that face. It was pale, too pale, like it hadn't seen sunlight in years. His eyes were sunken, dark, but it was the smile that got me. It was wide, unnaturally wide, like it had been carved into his face. He didn't say a word. He just watched us, standing perfectly still, as if he was waiting for something. Luke was the first to snap out of it. He grabbed his backpack, fumbled for the hunting knife he always carried. "Get the hell away from us," he shouted, holding the knife out in front of him like it could actually do something. The man didn't move, didn't flinch. His eyes never left us. Jack was still shaking, mumbling something under his breath. Paul crouched down next to him, trying to calm him, but Jack wouldn't stop. He kept saying the same thing over and over. "He's not human." Luke and I were too focused on the figure in the trees to pay attention to Jack's rambling. I don't know what I was expecting, but the man didn't come closer. He just stood there watching us. It was like he was waiting for us to make a move. And then he did something I'll never forget. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted his hand to his mouth, and with a single jerky motion he bit into his own wrist. Blood poured from the wound, dripping down his arm, but his expression never changed. That horrible smile stayed fixed on his face. Luke and I both froze. What the hell were we dealing with? Suddenly the man turned and walked back into the trees, disappearing into the darkness as quickly as he had appeared. For a moment none of us moved. The forest was dead silent again, like nothing had happened. But we knew better. We knew he was still out there, watching. "Pack up," I said, my voice shaking. "We're leaving." Luke didn't argue. None of us did. We threw everything into our bags as quickly as we could, barely stopping to zip them up. Jack was still too weak to stand, so Paul and I helped him to his feet. We didn't even bother trying to find the trail. We just ran, crashing through the underbrush like animals. Every sound, every snap of a branch felt like it was him closing in on us. I could hear Jack's labored breathing behind me, and every now and then he'd let out a low whimper. Paul kept looking over his shoulder like he was expecting the man to be right behind us. It felt like we ran for hours, but the forest never seemed to end. Every tree looked the same. Every turn took us deeper into nowhere, but we didn't stop, not until we saw the lights, a small cabin tucked away in the trees. Chapter 5. The cabin. The cabin looked abandoned, but we didn't care. We just needed shelter. We burst through the door, slamming it shut behind us. There was no lock, so Luke wedged a chair under the handle. We were all panting, hearts pounding in our chests. Jack collapsed onto the floor, still clutching his side. The cabin was dark, but it didn't matter. We weren't going back outside. For a long time, we just sat there, staring at the door, waiting for it to open, waiting for him to come for us. But he never did. As the adrenaline wore off, the reality of our situation started to sink in. We were lost in the middle of nowhere, with no idea which direction would lead us back to civilization. Jack was hurt, possibly seriously, and there was something out there, something that wasn't natural, wasn't human. "What the hell was that thing?" Paul whispered, breaking the silence that had fallen over us. Jack let out a low moan. It took something from me," he mumbled, his eyes unfocused. "Part of me, it's still out there." We all exchanged worried glances. Jack wasn't making sense, but after what we'd seen, who were we to say what was possible? Luke started pacing, running his hands through his hair. Okay, we need to think. We can't stay here forever. We need to find a way out." I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "First light. We'll wait until first light, then we'll try to find our way back to the road." The hours crawled by. None of us slept. We took turns watching the door and the windows, jumping at every creak of the old cabin, every rustle of leaves outside. As the first light of dawn peeked through the cracks in the walls, we prepared to leave. Jack was pale, sweating, but he insisted he could walk. We didn't have much choice but to believe him. We left slowly, cautiously, making our way back in the direction we thought we'd come from. The forest looked different in the daylight, less menacing, but we knew better now. We knew what was hiding in the shadows. It took us hours, but finally, miraculously, we found the road. Luke's truck was still there, untouched. We piled in and Luke gunned the engine, tires spinning in the dirt as we sped away from that cursed place. We never spoke about it again, not really. How could we? Who would believe us? Jack didn't come back to school. His parents said he'd gone to live with relatives out of state. But sometimes late at night I wonder if that's true. I wonder if part of him is still out there in those woods with that thing. The rest of us, we tried to move on. But you don't just forget something like that. It changes you, knowing that there are things out there that can't be explained, things that shouldn't exist. Sometimes when I'm alone in the dark, I swear I can hear footsteps, slow and deliberate. And I see that smile, that impossibly wide smile, carved into a face too pale to be human. We were just a bunch of high school buddies, you know. We thought we were invincible. But that summer in those woods, we learned the truth. There are some places man was never meant to go, some secrets that should stay buried, and sometimes the monsters are real. I don't usually talk about what happened. It's not because I don't want to. Believe me, sometimes I think telling the whole story would take the weight off. It's just that most people won't believe me. They'll nod politely, maybe laugh nervously, and then try to change the subject. But after all these years, I've decided I'll say it exactly how it happened. Maybe it'll make sense to someone else. Maybe it won't. But this is what I know. The year was 1985, late September, and I had just turned 28. My name is Jack Harland, and back then I was working a dead-end job at the Tacoma Steel Works on the outskirts of Tacoma, Washington. Every day was the same, the deafening clang of metal on metal, the acrid smell of burning slag, and the monotonous rhythm of machines that seemed to suck the life out of everything around them. I'd come home each night, my clothes reeking of sweat and steel, feeling like I was slowly being crushed under the weight of my own unfulfilled dreams. My only escape was hiking. The mountains, the woods, those were the places I felt truly alive, away from the cold gray walls of my life. I would often take weekends to explore the Cascade Mountains, going deeper and deeper into the wild, testing my limits, pushing myself farther each time. It was during these solitary treks that I felt most like myself, most connected to something greater than the daily grind that threatened to consume me. That fateful weekend was supposed to be like any other. I had heard about this place, Lake Wenatchee, from a guy at work named Mike. He was one of those old-timers who seemed to know every hidden gem in the state. "Jack," he said to me one day during our lunch break, his voice low as if he was sharing a secret, "You ever been to Lake Wenatchee?" I shook my head, curious. Mike leaned in closer, his eyes glinting with excitement. "It's a hidden gem, I tell you. Not many people know about it. And it's perfect for camping, just you in the wilderness. No tourists, no RVs, just pure, untouched nature." That sounded like heaven to me. Solitude, peace, a break from everything. I pressed Mike for more details, and he was happy to oblige, sketching out a rough map on a napkin and telling me about the best spots to camp. "Just be careful," he added as an afterthought, his tone suddenly serious. "Nature out there, it's different. Pristine, yeah, but also, I don't know. Just keep your wits about you, okay?" I nodded, not thinking much of his warning at the time. I'd been on plenty of solo hikes before. I knew how to handle myself in the wilderness, or so I thought. That Friday, I packed my gear with an excitement I hadn't felt in months. My trusty backpack was filled with all the essentials: a sturdy tent, sleeping bag, enough food for a few days, water purification tablets, first aid kit, and a few other survival items. I also threw in my old Nikon camera, hoping to capture some of the beauty Mike had described. I woke up before dawn on Friday, the anticipation making sleep impossible. The sky was just beginning to lighten as I threw my gear into my beat-up 1972 Ford F-100 pickup. The old truck had seen better days, its once vibrant blue paint now faded and chipped, but it had never let me down. As I pulled out of my driveway, the familiar rumble of the engine felt like a promise of adventure. The drive was long but scenic. I headed east on Highway 2, watching as the urban sprawl of the Seattle area gradually gave way to smaller towns, then to rolling farmland, and finally to the majestic forests of the Cascades. Endless trees stretched up into the sky, their leaves just starting to turn orange and gold, signaling the onset of fall. The morning mist clung to the valleys, creating an ethereal landscape that seemed to exist outside of time. As I drove, my mind wandered. I thought about my life, about the dreams I'd had when I was younger. I'd always imagined I'd do something more with my life than work in a steel mill. Maybe I'd be a writer or a photographer for National Geographic, capturing the world's hidden wonders. But life has a way of steering you off course, doesn't it? One compromise here, one detour there, and suddenly you're miles away from where you thought you'd be. I shook off these melancholy thoughts as I neared my destination. This weekend was about escaping all that, about reconnecting with the part of myself that still believed in possibility. I reached the trailhead Mike had described by mid-afternoon. The parking lot was little more than a wide spot in the road, with room for maybe a half-dozen cars. There were only a couple of vehicles there when I arrived, an old Jeep Wagoneer and a battered Volkswagen van that looked like it had seen its fair share of adventures. Perfect. I liked it quiet, just me and the mountains. As I got out of my truck, I took a deep breath, savoring the crisp mountain air. It smelled of pine and earth, with a hint of wood smoke from somewhere distant. The forest loomed before me, ancient and mysterious. For a moment I felt a strange sense of unease, as if the trees themselves were watching me. I brushed it off as pre-hike jitters and began to unload my gear. I strapped on my backpack, its familiar weight settling comfortably on my shoulders. I double-checked my map, an old USGS topographic map that Mike had marked up for me, and made sure my compass was easily accessible. With one last look at my truck, I set off down the trail. The hike itself wasn't too difficult, just a steady incline through thick forest. The trail was well maintained at first, but as I went deeper into the woods it became less defined. Fallen leaves carpeted the ground, making the path harder to follow. The trees grew denser, their branches intertwining overhead to create a canopy that filtered the sunlight into a soft green glow. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every now and then I'd hear a twig snap or leaves rustle, and I'd whirl around, half expecting to see something. But there was never anything there, just the endless sea of trees and undergrowth. I tried to focus on the beauty around me instead. The forest was alive with the sounds of birds and small animals. A pair of squirrels chased each other up a massive Douglas fir, chattering angrily. A woodpecker's rhythmic tapping echoed through the trees. Once I even caught a glimpse of a deer, its brown coat blending perfectly with the forest as it bounded away at my approach. As the afternoon wore on, the forest began to change subtly. The trees seemed to grow closer together, their trunks gnarled and twisted in ways that didn't seem quite natural. The birdsongs that had accompanied me earlier faded away, replaced by an oppressive silence that seemed to press in on me from all sides. I checked my map again, frowning. According to Mike's directions, I should be nearing the lake, but all I could see was more forest. Had I taken a wrong turn somewhere? I was about to turn back when I caught a glimmer of water through the trees ahead. Pushing through a dense thicket, I suddenly found myself on the shore of Lake Wenatchee. The sight took my breath away. The lake stretched out before me, vast and still, its surface like a mirror reflecting the surrounding mountains and the fading purple sky. The last rays of the setting sun painted the water in shades of gold and crimson. I stood there for a long moment, drinking in the view. This, I thought, this is why I come out here. In that moment, all the stress and frustration of my daily life seemed to melt away. I felt small in the face of such natural beauty, but also somehow more alive than I had in years. As the light began to fade, I set about making camp. I found a good spot near the shoreline, sheltered by a stand of towering cedars. I pitched my tent with practiced ease, gathered some firewood, and soon had a cheerful blaze going. Sitting by the fire, eating a simple meal of canned beans and beef jerky, I felt a deep sense of contentment. The night was clear, and as the fire died down, I leaned back to gaze at the stars. Out here, away from the city lights, the sky was a riot of stars, more than I'd ever seen before. The Milky Way stretched across the heavens like a river of light. That first night was peaceful, the kind of peace you can only find out there, away from people, from noise, from everything. I lay in my sleeping bag, listening to the wind rustle through the trees, the occasional splash of fish jumping in the lake. It was perfect, but that peace wouldn't last long. As I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that something out there in the darkness was watching me, waiting. If only I'd known then what I know now, I would have packed up and left right then. But I didn't, and that decision would change my life forever. I woke early the next morning just as the first light of dawn was beginning to filter through the trees. The air was crisp and cool, heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth. As I emerged from my tent, I was greeted by a sight that took my breath away. The lake was shrouded in a thick mist, giving it an otherworldly appearance. The surrounding mountains loomed like silent sentinels, their peaks just visible above the fog. After a quick breakfast of instant oatmeal and strong black coffee, I decided to explore the area around the lake. There were old logging trails that snaked through the woods, some of them barely visible, overgrown with moss and weeds. I chose one that seemed to lead deeper into the forest, away from the lake. As I hiked, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. The forest seemed different in the daylight, but not in a comforting way. The trees grew impossibly close together, their branches intertwining in unnatural ways. The undergrowth was dense and tangled, often forcing me to push my way through. I've spent enough time in the woods to know when something's not right, but I brushed it off as paranoia. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe I was just alone. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were watching me from the shadows between the trees. Around midday, I stumbled across something strange. The trail I had been following opened up into a small clearing, and there, half hidden by a dense thicket, stood an old cabin. It was a decrepit thing, looking like it hadn't been touched in decades. The windows were busted out, the door hung crooked on its hinges, and the roof had caved in on one side. Curiosity got the better of me, and I walked closer. There were no signs of recent activity, but the place gave me a bad vibe, like I wasn't supposed to be there. The wooden walls were weathered and gray, covered in a thick layer of moss and lichen. As I approached, I noticed something odd about the ground around the cabin. The grass and weeds grew in strange patterns, forming circles and spirals that didn't seem natural. I hesitated at the threshold, every instinct telling me to turn back. But I had come this far, and something compelled me to see what was inside. I pushed open the crooked door, wincing at the loud creak of rusted hinges. The interior of the cabin was mostly empty, just a few rusted tools and a collapsed table. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that streamed through the holes in the roof. The floorboards creaked ominously under my feet as I moved further inside. But then I found something that made my blood run cold. On one of the walls there were carvings, deep jagged marks scratched into the wood. At first I couldn't make out what they were, but as my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I realized they were symbols. Not the usual graffiti you'd find in abandoned places, but something older, more sinister. They looked like something you'd see in an old book of folklore or occult practices. I traced my fingers over the symbols, feeling the rough edges of the carvings. They seemed to pulse with a strange energy, and for a moment I could have sworn I heard a faint whispering just at the edge of hearing. I jerked my hand back, suddenly aware of how silent the forest had become. No birds, no insects, not even the rustle of leaves in the wind. That's when I noticed the smell. It was faint at first, barely noticeable under the musty odor of the cabin. But as I stood there, it grew stronger, a sickly sweet scent, like rotting meat mixed with something I couldn't identify. It seemed to be coming from beneath the floorboards. My heart racing, I backed out of the cabin. I had seen enough. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye. There, half hidden in the tall grass near the cabin, was a small, leather-bound book. I hesitated for a moment before picking it up. The leather was cracked and worn, the pages yellowed with age. I opened it carefully, afraid it might crumble in my hands. The pages were filled with dense, handwritten text in a language I didn't recognize. Interspersed with the writing were more of those strange symbols I had seen carved into the cabin walls. Some of the pages contained crude drawings, misshapen creatures that looked like a nightmarish blend of human and animal. I don't know why I took the book. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe some part of me knew it might be important later. Whatever the reason, I slipped it into my backpack before heading back towards my campsite. The hike back seemed to take longer than it should have. The forest felt different now, more oppressive. The trees seemed to lean in closer, their branches reaching out like grasping fingers. More than once I found myself taking wrong turns, ending up in unfamiliar clearings or dense thickets. It was as if the forest itself was trying to keep me from leaving. By the time I made it back to my camp, the sun was already starting to dip below the horizon. The lake, which had seemed so peaceful the night before, now looked dark and forbidding. The surface was unnaturally still, not even a ripple disturbing its glassy surface. I built a fire, more for comfort than warmth, and tried to shake off the unease that had settled over me. As the flames flickered, casting dancing shadows across my campsite, I took out the book I had found. In the firelight, the symbols on its cover seemed to writhe and shift, as if alive. I opened it again, flipping through the pages, trying to make sense of the strange text and disturbing images. That's when I heard it, a sound that made my heart stop. It was a scream, high-pitched and terrified, cutting through the stillness of the night. It seemed to come from somewhere across the lake, in the direction I had hiked earlier that day. The sound echoed across the water, fading into an eerie silence that was somehow worse than the scream itself. I sat there, frozen, straining my ears for any further sound, but there was nothing, just the crackle of my fire and the pounding of my own heart. I debated what to do. Should I try to find the source of the scream? But it was dark, and I didn't know the area well. Plus, something in my gut told me that whatever had caused that scream was not something I wanted to encounter. I spent a restless night, jumping at every sound, my mind conjuring terrifying scenarios. When dawn finally broke, I made a decision. I needed to leave this place. Something was very wrong here, and I didn't want to stick around to find out what. But as I began to pack up my camp, I realized with growing horror that things were not as I had left them. My backpack, which I was sure I had left inside my tent, was sitting outside, its contents strewn across the ground. And there, in the soft earth around my campsite, were footprints. But they weren't human footprints, nor any animal tracks I recognized. They were weird, like a mix between a man and something else. They were too large to be human and too defined to be a bear's. What chilled me to the bone was the realization that whatever had made those prints had walked right up to my tent while I slept. The tracks showed that it had stopped right at the entrance, stood there for who knows how long, and then turned back. I felt my stomach twist as I stared at those unnatural footprints. This wasn't normal. This wasn't right. I should have left right then, packed up and hiked back to the car. But something kept me there. I don't know if it was curiosity or stupidity, but I stayed. My hands shook as I gathered my scattered belongings, shoving them haphazardly into my backpack. The leather-bound book I'd found at the cabin seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, and I hesitated before packing it away. Part of me wanted to leave it behind, to sever any connection with the strangeness I'd encountered. But another part, a part I didn't fully understand, insisted I keep it close. As the morning wore on, I tried to convince myself that there was a logical explanation for everything. Maybe it was just an animal I'd never encountered before. Maybe the scream was just a bird or some other wildlife. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. That afternoon, driven by a morbid curiosity I couldn't shake, I decided to explore the far side of the lake, away from where I had gone the day before. As I hiked along the shore, the air grew thick, almost oppressive. It was like the forest itself was closing in around me, the trees leaning in, their branches reaching out like grasping fingers. I could feel eyes on me again, that same sensation of being watched. But every time I stopped to look around, I saw nothing but endless trees and undergrowth. The silence was deafening, broken only by the crunch of leaves under my feet and my own ragged breathing. It was around 3 p.m. when I heard it. A scream, high-pitched and terrified, cutting through the stillness of the woods. It was the same sound I'd heard the night before, but this time it was close, maybe a few hundred yards away. My blood ran cold, and for a moment I couldn't move. Then, without thinking, I ran toward the sound. My heart pounded in my chest, and branches whipped at my face as I crashed through the underbrush. I burst into a clearing and stopped dead in my tracks. In the middle of the clearing lay a body, a man face down in the dirt, his clothes torn to shreds. I approached cautiously, my whole body trembling. I knelt down, steeling myself as I rolled him over. His face, I'll never forget his face. It was twisted in horror, eyes wide open, mouth frozen mid-scream. But it wasn't just the expression that haunted me. His skin was pale, almost translucent, with strange vein-like markings spreading across his face and neck. Whatever had done this wasn't human. I stumbled back, my mind racing. I needed to get out of there. I needed to leave. But as I turned to run, I saw it. At the edge of the clearing, just barely visible in the shadows of the trees, something stood watching me. It was tall, unnaturally tall, its body lanky and distorted, like it didn't quite belong in this world. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and its eyes, they glowed. An unnatural, sickly yellow fixed on me with a predatory intensity. It didn't move, it just watched. For a moment I couldn't breathe. My legs felt like they were made of lead. But then something inside me snapped, and I bolted. I ran faster than I've ever run in my life, crashing through the trees, branches slashing at my face and arms. I didn't stop until I reached the lake. I didn't go back to camp. I didn't grab my gear. I just kept running, following the shoreline until I found the trail back to the parking lot. I didn't stop until I reached my car, my heart pounding in my chest, my lungs burning. As I fumbled with my keys, I glanced back at the forest. For a split second, I thought I saw a pale figure standing between the trees, those yellow eyes gleaming in the shadows. But when I blinked, it was gone. I drove straight to the nearest town, my hands shaking so badly I could barely keep the wheel steady. I went directly to the sheriff's office, burst through the door, and spilled out my story in a frantic jumble of words. I told them everything about the cabin, the footprints, the body, the creature. The sheriff, a weathered man named Jim Hawkins, listened patiently, his face impassive. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "Son," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind, "I've been sheriff in these parts for nigh on 30 years. I've heard all sorts of stories about those woods. Strange lights, weird sounds, people gone missing, but I've never found anything to back up those tales." I opened my mouth to protest, but he held up a hand to stop me. "Now, I'm not saying I don't believe you saw something out there. These woods, they can play tricks on a man's mind, especially when you're out there alone. But a body? A monster? That's a serious claim. We'll send a team out to investigate, but I wouldn't get your hopes up." I could tell from his tone that he didn't believe me, not really. They'd go through the motions, maybe send a couple of deputies to poke around the lake, but they wouldn't find anything. Whatever was out there, it was too smart, too otherworldly to leave evidence for the local police to find. I never went back to that lake. I never went hiking again. The memory of what I saw that day, of those glowing yellow eyes watching me from the shadows, haunted my dreams for years. A few months later, I heard about a couple of hikers who went missing in the same area. Their bodies were never found. The sheriff chalked it up to accidents, maybe a bear attack. But I knew better. Whatever I saw that day, whatever killed that man, it was still out there, lurking in the woods, waiting for its next victim. I left Tacoma not long after that. Couldn't stand to be so close to those mountains anymore. I moved east, tried to start a new life, but the memories followed me. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, the echo of that inhuman scream ringing in my ears. It wasn't until years later that I finally worked up the courage to open that leather-bound book again. I'd kept it all this time, hidden away in the back of my closet. As I flipped through the yellowed pages, I began to understand bits and pieces of the text. It spoke of ancient beings older than humanity that slumbered in the deep places of the world. It talked about rituals to awaken them, to harness their power, and it warned of the consequences. I realized then that what I had encountered in those woods was just the tip of the iceberg. There were things out there, ancient and powerful, that defied our understanding of the world, and sometimes, if you're not careful, you might just stumble upon them. So yeah, I don't tell this story often. Most people don't believe me, and I don't blame them. It's easier to dismiss it as the ramblings of a madman than to accept that there are things in this world that we can't explain, things that challenge everything we think we know. But if you ever find yourself near Lake Wenatchee, do yourself a favor. Stay away from the far side of the lake. Don't go looking for that cabin. And if you hear a scream echoing through the trees, run. Run as fast as you can. Because once you see what I saw, once it knows you're there, it won't stop until it gets what it wants. And trust me, you don't want to know what that is. It's been almost 40 years since that fateful weekend at Lake Wenatchee, but the memories haven't faded. If anything, they've grown sharper, more vivid with time. I'm an old man now, my hair gray, my hands not as steady as they once were. But my mind is as clear as ever, especially when it comes to those 3 days in September 1985. I've spent decades trying to make sense of what happened, to find some explanation that fits within the bounds of what we consider normal. I've read countless books on local legends, on cryptozoology, on the occult. I've reached out to experts in fields ranging from biology to parapsychology. But nothing quite fits. Nothing explains what I saw in those woods. The leather-bound book I took from the cabin has been both a blessing and a curse. Over the years, I've managed to decipher more of its contents, though much of it remains a mystery. It speaks of things that shake the very foundations of what I thought I knew about the world. Ancient beings, older than time itself, slumbering in the dark places of the earth. Rituals and sacrifices to awaken them, to harness their terrible power. But for every answer the book provides, it raises a dozen more questions. Who wrote it? How did they come by this knowledge? And why was it left in that dilapidated cabin in the middle of nowhere? I've thought about turning the book over to authorities, to scientists who might be able to make more sense of it. But every time I consider it, I'm held back by a deep-seated fear. What if it falls into the wrong hands? What if someone tries to use the knowledge it contains? The consequences could be catastrophic. So I keep it hidden, locked away where no one else can find it. It's my burden to bear, I suppose. My penance for stumbling into something I never should have seen. I've tried to move on with my life, to put the past behind me. I left Tacoma, moved across the country, started a new career. I even got married, had kids. But the shadow of what happened at Lake Wenatchee has always loomed over me. My wife, ex-wife now, she tried to understand, but how could she? How could anyone who wasn't there that day? Over the years, I've kept tabs on the area around Lake Wenatchee. I've collected newspaper clippings, police reports, anything I can find about strange occurrences in those woods. The missing hikers I heard about shortly after my experience weren't the last. Every few years, someone else disappears. Sometimes they're found, confused and disoriented, with no memory of where they've been. Sometimes they're never seen again. The official explanations are always the same. People get lost in the woods all the time. Wild animals, accidents. But I know better. I know what's really out there. I've thought about going back, facing my fears, confronting whatever it is that lurks in those woods. But every time I consider it, I see those glowing yellow eyes in my mind, and I know I can't. I'm not the young man I once was. If I couldn't outrun it then, I certainly can't now. So I do the only thing I can. I warn people. I tell my story to anyone who will listen, hoping that maybe, just maybe, I can prevent someone else from stumbling into the same nightmare I did. Most people don't believe me, of course. They smile politely, maybe humor the old man for a while. But I can see it in their eyes. They think I'm crazy or senile or both. But every once in a while I see a flicker of recognition in someone's eyes, a hint of fear, quickly masked, and I wonder, have they seen it too? Are there others out there who have encountered the things that lurk in the shadows of Lake Wenatchee? I may never know the full truth of what happened to me all those years ago. I may never understand the nature of the creature I saw or the significance of the symbols in that old cabin. But I know what I saw. I know what I experienced. And I know that there are things in this world that defy explanation, things that lurk just beyond the edge of our understanding. So if you're ever in the Pacific Northwest, if you ever find yourself drawn to the pristine waters of Lake Wenatchee, remember my story. Remember that sometimes the most beautiful places hide the darkest secrets. And if you hear a scream echoing through the trees, if you feel eyes watching you from the shadows, don't hesitate. Don't let curiosity get the better of you. Run. Run as fast and as far as you can, because once you've seen what's out there, once it knows you're aware of its existence, it will never stop hunting you. And trust me, there are some things in this world that are better left undiscovered. As for me, I'm an old man now. My adventuring days are long behind me, but sometimes on dark nights when the wind howls outside my window, I find myself back in those woods. I feel the oppressive silence, smell the dank odor of that old cabin, see those terrifying yellow eyes gleaming in the darkness, and I wonder, is it still out there? Is it waiting? And what will happen when there's no one left who remembers, no one left to warn others of the danger? I suppose in the end that's why I'm finally telling this story in full. Not because I expect you to believe me, but because I hope that maybe, just maybe, it might save someone else from the fate I narrowly escaped. Because the truth is out there, hidden in the shadows of Lake Wenatchee. And sometimes the truth is more terrifying than we could ever imagine. The forest loomed before us, a wall of green that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. I stood at the trailhead with my 4 closest friends, adjusting the straps of my backpack and trying to ignore the uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach. This was supposed to be a simple weekend hiking trip, a chance to escape the pressures of our daily lives and reconnect with nature. But as I stared into the dense undergrowth, I couldn't shake the sense that we were about to step into something far beyond our control. "Come on, David," Adam called, already several paces ahead on the narrow dirt path. We're burning daylight." I forced a smile and fell into step behind him, with Josh, Ben, and Tom bringing up the rear. We'd been friends since high school, the five of us, bound together by shared experiences and a loyalty that had weathered the storms of college and early adulthood. Adam and Josh were twins, though you'd never know it from looking at them. Adam was all restless energy and impulsive decisions, while Josh was quieter, more cautious. Ben was our voice of reason, always ready with a thoughtful word or a steadying hand. Tom was the jokester, quick with a laugh or a witty comment to lighten the mood. And me? I suppose I was the glue that held us all together, the mediator when tensions rose and the planner who made sure we didn't get too far off track. This trip had been Adam's idea, of course. He'd stumbled across an old hiking guide from the 1980s, filled with descriptions of forgotten trails and hidden natural wonders. The particular route we'd chosen was barely a footnote in the book, a brief mention of a challenging path through pristine wilderness. "It'll be an adventure," Adam had insisted, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "Something to tell our grandkids about." None of us had the heart to refuse him, even though the rational part of my brain screamed that this was a terrible idea. So here we were, 5 city boys venturing into a forest that hadn't seen human footprints in decades. The first few hours of our hike were uneventful. The trail was overgrown but still visible, winding its way through towering pines and around massive boulders. We chatted and joked as we walked, our voices echoing in the still air. The forest was eerily quiet, I realized after a while. No birdsong, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush, just the crunch of our boots on the leaf-strewn ground and the occasional creaking of branches high above. "Anyone else notice how quiet it is?" I asked during a water break, trying to keep my voice casual. Tom grinned, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. Maybe all the animals are hiding from Adam's terrible singing. Adam threw a pine cone at him, and just like that, the moment of unease passed. We shouldered our packs and pressed on, determined to reach our planned campsite before nightfall. As the day wore on, the trail became increasingly difficult to follow. What had started as a clear path degenerated into little more than a game trail, forcing us to scramble over fallen logs and push through thick patches of ferns. The trees seemed to press in closer, their branches intertwining overhead to block out most of the sunlight. More than once I caught myself glancing over my shoulder, unable to shake the feeling that we were being watched. It was late afternoon when we finally reached a small clearing that seemed suitable for camping. We set up our tents in a rough circle, gathering fallen branches for a fire. As the flames crackled to life, I felt some of the tension leave my shoulders. We sat around the fire, passing around a flask of whiskey Adam had smuggled along and sharing stories from our college days. But as night fell, the unease returned. The darkness beyond our circle of firelight seemed alive somehow, shifting and pulsing with unseen movement. I tried to focus on the conversation, on Tom's latest joke about his disastrous dating life, but my eyes kept being drawn to the shadows at the edge of the clearing. "Did you guys hear that?" Ben asked suddenly, his voice low and tense. We all fell silent, straining our ears. For a long moment there was nothing. Then I heard it, a soft rustling in the underbrush, too deliberate to be the wind. It was the sound of something large moving slowly through the forest, circling our campsite. "Probably just a deer," Adam said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. We stayed up late that night, feeding the fire and talking in low voices. None of us wanted to be the first to retreat to their tent, to face the darkness alone. When we finally did turn in, I lay awake for hours, listening to every creak and snap from the forest around us. Morning brought a shock that sent ice through my veins. Ben's backpack, which he'd left just outside his tent, was gone. We searched the entire campsite and the surrounding area, but there was no sign of it. It was as if it had simply vanished into thin air. "Maybe a bear got it?" Tom suggested, but we all knew that was unlikely. A bear would have left some trace, some sign of its presence. This was something else entirely. Ben was visibly shaken, his usual calm demeanor cracking. "All my food was in there," he said, his voice tight with worry. "My spare clothes, my first aid kit." We divided up our remaining supplies, making sure Ben had enough to get by. Adam was all for pressing on, insisting that we couldn't let a missing backpack derail our entire trip. I could see the doubt in the other's eyes, but in the end we agreed to continue. We were already a day's hike from the trailhead, and none of us wanted to admit defeat so easily. As we set off, I couldn't help but feel that we were making a terrible mistake. The forest seemed different somehow, more menacing. The trees loomed larger, their branches reaching out like grasping fingers. The trail all but disappeared, forcing us to rely on Adam's compass and our own instincts to navigate. We hiked in silence for most of the day, each lost in our own thoughts. Even Tom's usual stream of jokes had dried up, replaced by a tense vigilance. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves had us spinning around, searching for a threat we couldn't see. It was late afternoon when we heard the scream. It echoed through the forest, a sound of pure terror that set my heart racing. We all froze, looking at each other with wide eyes. That wasn't human, right? Tom asked, his voice shaking. Before anyone could answer, we heard it again, closer this time. It was a primal sound filled with pain and rage, and it was definitely horrifyingly human. "We need to help," Adam said, already moving in the direction of the sound. I grabbed his arm, holding him back. "We don't know what's out there," I hissed. "We need to stick together and get out of here." For a moment I thought he was going to argue, but then another scream tore through the air, cut off abruptly in a way that made my blood run cold. Adam's face went pale and he nodded silently. We abandoned any pretense of following a trail, simply picking a direction and moving as quickly as we could. The forest seemed to work against us, branches whipping at our faces, roots reaching up to trip us. As the light began to fade, panic set in. We were lost, hopelessly turned around in a wilderness that suddenly felt vast and alien. "We need to make camp," Ben said finally, his voice rough with exhaustion. "We can't keep going like this in the dark." No one argued. We found a small space between two massive boulders and set up our tents with shaking hands. No one suggested building a fire. Somehow the idea of drawing attention to ourselves seemed worse than facing the darkness. I ended up sharing a tent with Tom, neither of us willing to sleep alone. We lay there in silence, listening to the sounds of the forest. Every noise seemed amplified, every shadow a potential threat. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful and filled with nightmares. I woke to the sound of Tom's panicked breathing. "David," he whispered, his voice tight with fear. "There's something out there." I held my breath, straining my ears. At first I heard nothing, then unmistakably the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps circling our tent. We lay there, frozen in terror, as the footsteps completed one circuit, then another. I could hear the others stirring in their tents, aware of the danger but too afraid to move. The footsteps paused directly in front of our tent. There was a moment of agonizing silence, then the sound of a zipper being slowly pulled open. Tom let out a strangled cry, and suddenly everything was chaos. We burst out of the tent, colliding with Adam and Ben, who had emerged from theirs. In the pre-dawn gloom, I caught a glimpse of a figure, tall and unnaturally thin, melting back into the shadows of the forest. "Where's Josh?" Adam yelled, his voice cracking with panic. "Josh!" We searched the campsite frantically, but there was no sign of Josh or his tent. It was as if he had never been there at all. Adam was inconsolable, alternating between calling his brother's name and demanding that we go search for him. Ben and I tried to calm him down, to make him see reason, but grief and fear had pushed him beyond rational thought. "We need to get out of here," I said finally, grabbing Adam by the shoulders and forcing him to look at me. "We need to find help. We can't do this alone." For a moment I thought he was going to hit me. Then the fight seemed to drain out of him, leaving behind a hollow shell of the friend I knew. We packed up what little we had left and started walking, picking a direction at random and hoping it would lead us to safety. The day passed in a blur of exhaustion and terror. We moved as quickly as we could, but the forest seemed to be actively working against us. Paths that looked promising would end abruptly in impenetrable thickets. Landmarks we used to orient ourselves would vanish when we looked back, as if the very landscape was shifting around us. As night began to fall again, we made a grim discovery. Tucked away in a small hollow, we found Josh's backpack. It was torn and blood-stained, its contents strewn across the forest floor. Of Josh himself there was no sign. Adam broke down completely at the sight, collapsing to his knees and sobbing uncontrollably. The rest of us stood in shocked silence, the reality of our situation finally sinking in. We were being hunted, picked off one by something that knew these woods far better than we ever could. We made camp there, too exhausted and demoralized to continue. No one spoke as we set up our tents. What was there to say? We'd lost 2 of our friends to this forest, and the unspoken fear was that we'd never make it out ourselves. I volunteered to take first watch, unable to face the prospect of trying to sleep. I sat with my back against a tree, straining my eyes to penetrate the darkness beyond our little camp. The others retreated to their tents, though I doubted any of them would find rest. It was nearly midnight when I heard it, a soft melodic whistle drifting through the trees. It was a tune I almost recognized, something just on the edge of memory. Without thinking, I found myself standing, drawn towards the sound. "David?" Ben's voice, thick with sleep, snapped me back to reality. "What's going on?" I shook my head, trying to clear the fog that had settled over my thoughts. I'm not sure. I thought I heard something." Ben crawled out of his tent, rubbing his eyes. "We should wake the others. I don't like this." But when we went to rouse Adam and Tom, we found their tents empty. There was no sign of a struggle, no indication of where they might have gone. They had simply vanished, as if the forest had swallowed them whole. Panic clawed at my throat, threatening to overwhelm me. Ben grabbed my arm, his grip painfully tight. "We need to move," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Now." We abandoned the camp, leaving behind everything but the clothes on our backs. We ran blindly through the forest, branches whipping at our faces, roots threatening to trip us with every step. I could hear something moving through the trees parallel to us, keeping pace effortlessly. I don't know how long we ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that endless green nightmare. But eventually, inevitably, we reached our limit. I stumbled, my legs giving out beneath me, and Ben collapsed beside me. We lay there on the forest floor, gasping for breath, waiting for whatever had been chasing us to finally reveal itself. But nothing came. The forest was silent once more, holding its secrets close. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, we heard a sound that made my heart leap. The distant rumble of a car engine. Somehow, against all odds, we'd made it back to civilization. We stumbled out of the forest and onto a narrow country road, waving frantically at the first car we saw. The driver, an older man in a battered pickup truck, took one look at our wild eyes and torn clothes and immediately offered us a ride to the nearest town. The authorities didn't believe our story at first. How could they? We spun a tale of missing friends, of something stalking us through an endless forest, of a landscape that seemed to shift and change. It sounded insane, even to my own ears. But they couldn't ignore the fact that 3 people had gone missing. Search parties were organized. The forest combed for any sign of Adam, Tom, or Josh. They found our abandoned campsites, weathered and overgrown as if they'd been there for years rather than days. They found scraps of clothing, a torn backpack, a single shoe. But of our friends there was no trace. Weeks turned into months, and still, no answers came. The official investigation was eventually closed, the disappearances chalked up to a tragic hiking accident. But I knew the truth. We all did. Ben and I tried to move on with our lives, but the memory of those days in the forest haunted us. We'd wake up in the middle of the night, convinced we could hear that soft, melodic whistle drifting through our windows. We'd catch glimpses of tall, thin figures out of the corner of our eyes, only to find nothing there when we turned to look. Years have passed now, and I still don't know what happened in those woods. I don't know what took our friends or why we were allowed to escape. All I know is that something is out there, something old and patient and hungry. And sometimes on quiet nights when the wind whispers through the trees, I can almost hear it calling me back. The crisp autumn air bit at my cheeks as I trudged along the winding trail. It was early October 1995, and the Appalachian forests were ablaze with color, vibrant reds, oranges, and golds painting the landscape in nature's finest palette. I'd been hiking for nearly 4 decades, ever since I could toddle alongside my father on gentle nature walks. Now, at 43, I found solace in the wilderness that I couldn't find anywhere else. My name is David Hawthorne, and I've always been drawn to the path less traveled. There's a certain allure to stepping off the map, to exploring places unmarked by human hands. It's a feeling of discovery, of connection to something ancient and untamed. That's what led me to this remote corner of Tennessee, just a stone's throw from the North Carolina border. I'd heard whispers of a trail called Lost Pines from a grizzled old hiker at O'Malley's Bar in Knoxville. He spoke of it in hushed tones, as if sharing a closely guarded secret. "Ain't on no map," he'd said, nursing a glass of bourbon. "But it's there all right, most beautiful and unspoiled stretch of forest you'll ever lay eyes on." The idea had taken root in my mind, growing and spreading until I could think of little else. I spent weeks preparing, poring over topographical maps of the region, trying to pinpoint where this mythical trail might be. Finally, on a crisp Friday morning, I loaded up my trusty 1985 Chevy Silverado and set out. The drive took longer than expected. Paved roads gave way to gravel, then to rutted dirt paths that tested the limits of my truck's suspension. The forest grew denser, the trees pressing in on either side like silent sentinels. As the hours ticked by, doubt began to gnaw at me. What if the old man at the bar had been pulling my leg? What if there was no Lost Pines trail? Just as I was considering turning back, I spotted it, a barely noticeable gap in the tree line, just wide enough for a person to slip through. There was no sign, no marker of any kind, but something in my gut told me this was it. I parked the truck in a small clearing off the road, grabbed my pack, and plunged into the wilderness. The first few miles were grueling. The trail, if you could call it that, was overgrown and steep. I had to watch every step, navigating around jutting roots and loose rocks. The forest was eerily quiet, devoid of the usual chatter of birds and small animals. I chalked it up to the late hour and pressed on, driven by a mixture of excitement and stubborn determination. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant hues of pink and orange, I reached a small clearing. And there they were, the Lost Pines, a grove of ancient conifers, their needles a deep, almost blue-green, standing in stark contrast to the deciduous forest around them. It was a breathtaking sight, like stumbling upon a hidden oasis in the desert. I set up camp at the edge of the clearing, pitching my tent and gathering wood for a fire. As night fell, the temperature dropped rapidly. I huddled close to the flames, grateful for their warmth and light. But despite the beauty of my surroundings, I couldn't shake an uneasy feeling that had been growing since I entered the forest. It was the silence that got to me first. In all my years of hiking, I'd never encountered a forest this quiet. No owls hooting, no rustling of nocturnal creatures, not even the whisper of wind through the trees. It was as if the entire world was holding its breath. Then, just as I was considering turning in for the night, I heard it. A low, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the forest floor. I froze, my hand instinctively reaching for the hunting knife at my belt. My mind raced through possibilities, a bear maybe, or a wounded deer, but deep down, I knew it wasn't any animal I was familiar with. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. "Is someone there?" The dragging stopped abruptly. For a long moment there was nothing but silence. Then, just at the edge of my hearing, I caught what sounded like a low, rumbling chuckle. It was brief, so faint I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. But the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and I knew sleep would be a long time coming. I spent the night with my back to the fire, eyes straining to pierce the darkness beyond the circle of light. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves set my nerves on edge. By the time dawn broke, I was exhausted but wide awake, my nerves frayed from the long night of vigilance. As I broke camp, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The ground around my campsite was disturbed, marked by strange, elongated footprints and drag marks that hadn't been there the night before. Whatever had made those sounds had come close, far closer than I'd realized. I shouldered my pack and set off down the trail, eager to put some distance between myself and the clearing. The day was overcast, the sun a pale disk barely visible through the cloud cover. The forest seemed different in the gray light, more forbidding, the shadows deeper and more numerous. As I hiked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every so often I'd catch a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye, only to turn and find nothing there. The silence, too, persisted. No bird song, no buzzing insects, just the crunch of my boots on the leaf-strewn path. By midday I reached another clearing, but this one stopped me in my tracks. The trees here had been mutilated. There was no other word for it. Trunks were splintered and torn, great gouges carved into the wood as if by massive claws. The ground was churned up, and those same strange footprints I'd seen earlier crisscrossed the area. I stood there, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. No animal I knew of could have done this kind of damage, and why? It didn't look like the result of a predator hunting or marking territory. It was almost purposeful, as if whatever had done this wanted to send a message. That's when I heard it again, the dragging sound, closer this time and accompanied by something else, a low guttural breathing, like something large trying to be quiet and not quite succeeding. I spun around, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. At first I saw nothing. Then movement caught my eye. A figure tall and gaunt stepped out from behind a massive oak. He, for it was shaped like a man, wore tattered old-fashioned clothes that hung loosely on his frame. A wide-brimmed hat cast his face in shadow, but I could see his eyes, unnaturally bright, almost glowing in the gloom. For a long moment we just stared at each other. I wanted to run, to shout, to do something, but my body wouldn't respond. It was as if I was frozen in place by those eerie, luminous eyes. Then he smiled. It was a horrible thing, that smile, too wide, revealing teeth that were sharp and numerous. And suddenly I could move again. I took a stumbling step backward, my hand fumbling for my knife. "What? What are you?" I managed to croak out. The figure's smile widened impossibly further. When he spoke, his voice was like gravel grinding together, deep and rough and utterly inhuman. "Hungry," he said, and then he moved. I'd like to say I stood my ground, that I fought bravely, but the truth is, I ran. I ran like I'd never run before, crashing through the underbrush with no regard for the trail or my direction. Branches whipped at my face, roots threatened to trip me, but I didn't slow down. Behind me I could hear it pursuing, that dragging sound punctuated by heavy footfalls and that terrible, rasping breathing. I don't know how long I ran. It could have been minutes or hours. The forest blurred around me, an endless maze of trees and shadows. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but terror kept me moving. Finally, I burst out of the tree line and found myself back at my truck. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them into the ignition. As the engine roared to life, I chanced to look back at the forest. There, at the edge of the trees, stood the figure. He wasn't pursuing anymore, just watching. As our eyes met, he raised a hand in what almost seemed like a wave. Then he turned and melted back into the shadows of the forest. I drove for hours, not stopping until I was well clear of the mountains. Even then I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of being hunted. I never reported what happened. Who would believe me? A man in old-fashioned clothes with glowing eyes and too many teeth? I'd be laughed out of the police station. In the years since, I've tried to rationalize what happened. Maybe it was a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and isolation. Maybe I stumbled into some backwoods cult or survivalist camp. But deep down, I know the truth. There are things in this world that defy explanation, things that lurk in the dark places where humans rarely tread. I've never gone back to Lost Pines. I've never gone hiking again, period. Some trails are meant to stay lost. Some secrets are meant to remain buried. And sometimes the price of discovery is far too high. But on quiet nights when the wind whispers through the trees outside my window, I find myself thinking about that forest. And I wonder, is it still out there, that thing with the glowing eyes and hungry smile? And how many other hikers have stumbled upon Lost Pines, never to return? The wilderness holds many secrets, and not all of them are beautiful. Some are dark, ancient, and hungry. And they're waiting, always waiting, for those foolish enough to wander off the beaten path. In the months following my encounter at Lost Pines, I tried to resume my normal life. I went back to my job as a high school history teacher, graded papers, and attempted to lose myself in the mundane routines of everyday existence. But the memory of what I'd seen haunted me. I'd wake up in cold sweats, the echo of that rasping voice, hungry, ringing in my ears. I became obsessed with researching the area, spending countless hours in libraries and, as the internet became more accessible, scouring online forums for any mention of similar encounters. Most of what I found was easily dismissible, campfire stories and urban legends. But every so often I'd come across an account that made my blood run cold, that resonated with a ring of truth I couldn't ignore. There was the story of a logging crew in 1932 that vanished without a trace, their equipment left behind, the trees around their campsite torn and splintered. A group of college students on a camping trip in 1978 who were never seen again, their last known location uncomfortably close to where I'd had my encounter. And most recently, a family of 4 whose car was found abandoned on a remote forest road in 1993, with no sign of where they might have gone. Each incident was explained away by authorities: animal attacks, people getting lost in the vast wilderness, or simply running away from their lives. But I knew better. I could see the pattern, the similarities that linked these disappearances to my own experience. As my obsession grew, my personal life began to suffer. My wife, Ellen, couldn't understand why I'd given up hiking, why I'd flinch at the sound of branches scraping against our bedroom window on windy nights. Our conversations became strained, filled with long silences and things left unsaid. Eventually she left, unable to live with the shell of a man I'd become. I should have let it go then, should have sought help, tried to move on, but I couldn't. The need to understand, to find some explanation for what I'd encountered, consumed me. It was in the spring of 1998 that I finally found something concrete. An obituary in a small local paper from the 1800s caught my eye. It spoke of a trapper named Jeremiah Blackwood who'd lived in the mountains, known for his strange mannerisms and unsettling appearance. The article mentioned that he'd been found dead in his cabin, his body torn asunder in a manner most unnatural. What really grabbed my attention, though, was the description of Blackwood, tall and gaunt, with eyes that seemed to glow with an inner light. It was him. It had to be. But how was that possible? The obituary was from 1873. I took a leave of absence from work and headed back to Tennessee. I told myself it was to do more research, to dig through local historical records. But deep down, I knew I was being drawn back to Lost Pines. The drive was familiar, yet charged with a new sense of purpose and dread. As I neared the area where I'd parked 3 years ago, I noticed changes. New no trespassing signs had been erected, and the old logging road I'd used was now blocked by a heavy gate. I parked my truck and continued on foot, my backpack loaded with supplies, my old hunting rifle slung over my shoulder. I told myself it was just for protection against wild animals, but I knew better. As I slipped into the forest, the world seemed to grow quieter, the air thicker. The trail was overgrown, barely visible now. But I remembered the way, each step bringing back vivid memories of my last journey here. As night fell, I made camp, but sleep eluded me. Every sound, every shadow seemed to hide potential threats. Dawn broke, gray and cheerless. I pressed on deeper into the forest. The trees grew denser, older, their gnarled branches reaching out like grasping fingers. And then, suddenly, I was there. The clearing with the lost pines. It looked different in the pale morning light. The pines seemed darker, their needles a deep blue-black. The ground was bare, no underbrush, no signs of animal life, just bare earth and those ancient towering trees. As I stood there, taking it all in, I heard it, that familiar dragging sound. My heart began to race, my palms sweaty on the grip of my rifle. I spun around, searching for the source. He emerged from between 2 massive pines, just as I remembered him. The tattered clothes, the wide-brimmed hat, those glowing eyes. But in the daylight I could see more. His skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tight over an angular frame, and his hands, long-fingered and ending in sharp, blackened nails. "You came back," he said, his voice like stones grinding together. I raised my rifle, my hands shaking. "What are you?" I demanded. "Why are you here?" He tilted his head, regarding me with something like curiosity. "I've always been here," he said, "long before your kind came, long before these trees. I am this place, and this place is me." "But the obituary," I said, my mind racing. "Jeremiah Blackwood." He laughed, a sound like branches breaking in a storm. "A name I wore for a time, one of many. Your kind needs names, needs to categorize, to understand. But I am beyond understanding. He took a step forward and I tightened my grip on the rifle. Don't come any closer, I warned. He stopped, that unnatural smile spreading across his face. You came back, he repeated. They always come back. The curiosity, the need to know. It draws you in, like moths to a flame. The others, I said, realization dawning. The missing people. You? Hungry, he said, echoing our first encounter. Always hungry. For flesh, yes, but more than that. For experiences, for memories, for the essence of what makes you human. He began to change then, his form shifting and blurring. I saw flashes of other faces, men, women, children, faces I recognized from missing persons reports I'd studied. They flowed across his features like water, each one wearing an expression of terror. I fired the rifle, the shot deafening in the unnatural silence of the forest. The bullet passed through him as if he were smoke, and his laughter echoed around me. You can't harm me, he said, his voice now a chorus of all those he'd taken. I am this place, and this place is me, and now you are part of it too. The trees around us began to move, roots tearing free of the earth. I turned to run, but there was nowhere to go. The forest had come alive, and it was closing in. As the roots wrapped around my legs, as I felt myself being pulled into the hungry earth, I understood at last. The lost pines weren't just a place. They were a trap, a lure, drawing in the curious, the adventurous, those who dared to step off the beaten path. And as darkness closed in around me, as I felt my very essence being absorbed into the ancient hunger of this place, my last thought was of all those who would come after me. Drawn by the mystery, by the whispered stories of those who ventured into the woods and never returned. The lost will always be found, and the hungry will always feed. The woods have always been my sanctuary. For as long as I can remember, I've found solace among the trees, their quiet presence a balm for my troubled mind. But on the fateful day in 1996, the forest's familiar embrace turned into something far more sinister, forever changing my perception of the world around me. I had returned from a tour in Bosnia about a year earlier, and to say I was struggling to readjust would be an understatement. The horrors I'd witnessed, the things I'd done, they clung to me like a second skin, impossible to shed. The doctors called it PTSD, but that clinical term failed to capture the essence of my daily struggle. Every mundane task felt like navigating a minefield, each unexpected sound a potential trigger for memories I desperately wanted to forget. Walking became my therapy. I'd lace up my boots and head out, seeking the deepest, most remote trails I could find. My preferred spot was a little-known path off Ridgeway Peak, just north of Oak Ridge, Tennessee. It was the kind of place locals avoided, its reputation tainted by whispers of government testing during the Cold War, abandoned missile silos, and clandestine black ops. Most dismissed these stories as baseless conspiracy theories, but I knew better. My time in Bosnia had taught me that the government had secrets they'd kill to protect. I'd been part of missions that left me with more questions than answers. Cleanup operations in areas where locals spoke of unnatural occurrences. The details were always classified, but the body count was real enough. That morning I packed light. Just a water bottle, my trusty Swiss Army knife, and an old map I'd gotten from a ranger years ago. The trail wasn't marked on most current maps, which suited me just fine. By noon I was deep in the heart of the forest, at least 5 or 6 miles from the nearest road. The air was unusually thick and humid for an autumn day in Tennessee, and sweat soaked through my jacket as I pushed on. As I reached a small clearing, something changed. The temperature dropped dramatically as if I'd stepped into a walk-in freezer. I glanced up, expecting to see cloud cover, but the sky remained clear and blue. An eerie silence descended, absent of even the faintest rustle of leaves or chirp of birds. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I pressed on, approaching a ridge the locals called Disappearing Ridge. The name had always seemed like just another bit of local color, but as I neared the top, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure stood about 50 yards ahead, tall and dressed in dark clothing, but it was the face, or lack thereof, that truly terrified me. From that distance I couldn't make out any features, just a blank expanse where a face should have been. I blinked, and in that instant the figure vanished. My heart raced as I tried to rationalize what I'd seen. A PTSD-induced hallucination, a trick of the light? But deep down I knew this was different. It felt too real, too present. I quickened my pace, eager to reach the ridge and descend the other side where the dense tree cover would offer some sense of protection. As I crested the ridge, I noticed something else. Footprints. They were fresh, leading off the path and into the thick underbrush. The size and depth of the impressions were unsettling. Whoever or whatever had left them was unnaturally heavy, the boot treads sinking deep into the soft earth. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to retreat to the safety of civilization. But a morbid curiosity, honed by years of confronting the unexplainable, propelled me forward. I followed the tracks, pushing through dense foliage and scrambling over moss-covered rocks. With each step I felt as if I was leaving the world I knew behind, venturing into a realm where the normal rules no longer applied. The forest grew darker, the trees pressing in closer, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out most of the sunlight. After what felt like hours of hiking, the trail ended abruptly at the edge of a small ravine. What I saw at the bottom made me question everything I thought I knew about the area's history. Half hidden by overgrown vegetation was a bunker, its rusted metal door slightly ajar. I'd heard rumors of old government facilities in these hills, but seeing one in person was something else entirely. I stood at the edge of the ravine for several long moments, weighing my options. The sensible part of me urged caution, insisted that I should walk away and pretend I'd never seen this place. But my training and experiences had shaped me into someone who couldn't ignore such mysteries. With a deep breath, I began my descent into the ravine. The bunker's entrance loomed before me, a dark maw leading into the unknown. The air that seeped out was stale and carried a faint metallic odor that made me think of old blood. I pulled out my flashlight and stepped inside, my eyes struggling to adjust to the gloom. The beam of light revealed a scene straight out of a Cold War nightmare. Rows of rusted filing cabinets lined the walls, their contents long since destroyed by time and the elements. Broken equipment lay scattered across the floor, their purposes now impossible to discern. But it was what stood in the center of the room that truly chilled me to my core. A metal table, not unlike those I'd seen in morgues, dominated the space. What set this one apart were the leather straps attached to its sides, cracked and weathered, but unmistakably designed to restrain a person, or something else. My mind raced back to those classified missions in Bosnia, to the mangled bodies we'd found, and the vague reports of unidentified hostiles or experimental failures that always followed. I was about to turn and leave when I heard it, footsteps, heavy and deliberate, coming from behind me. I spun around, my heart pounding in my chest, and found myself face to face with the figure from the ridge. Only now I could see the true horror of its appearance. The face, if you could call it that, was a smooth, featureless expanse. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just blank flesh where features should have been. But that wasn't the most terrifying part. In its hand, the figure clutched a long, wickedly sharp knife that gleamed dully in the beam of my flashlight. I backed away, every nerve in my body screaming for me to run, but there was nowhere to go. The ravine was a dead end, and the only exit was behind this nightmarish entity. It took a step toward me, moving with a slow, almost casual gait, as if it had all the time in the world to corner its prey. "Who are you?" I shouted, my voice echoing in the confined space. I gripped my Swiss Army knife tightly, though I knew it would be little use against the creature's larger blade. There was no response, just that blank face and those relentless measured steps. My mind raced, searching for a way out of this impossible situation. Then I spotted it, an old rusted pipe jutting from the wall, likely part of the bunker's long-defunct ventilation system. Without thinking, I lunged for it, wrenching it free with strength born of desperation. The creature was upon me in an instant. I swung the pipe with all my might, connecting solidly with its head. The impact would have felled any normal man, but this thing barely staggered. It paused for the briefest moment, then lunged forward with frightening speed, its knife slashing through the air. I felt a searing pain as the blade grazed my arm, but adrenaline kept me moving. Dodging another wild swing, I managed to slip past the creature and bolt for the exit. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, not daring to look back as I scrambled up the ravine and plunged into the forest. Branches whipped at my face, roots threatened to trip me at every step, but I pushed on. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like lead, but the primal fear of what lurked behind me drove me forward. I had no idea how long I ran or in what direction. The woods all looked the same in my panic, an endless maze of trees and shadows. Finally, miraculously, I stumbled onto a familiar stretch of trail. I chanced a glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see that featureless face emerging from the undergrowth. But there was nothing, just the silent, indifferent forest stretching out behind me. I didn't stop running until I reached my truck, and even then I didn't feel safe. I sped away from Ridgeway Peak, not slowing down until I was miles away and the forest was nothing but a dark smudge in my rearview mirror. In the days that followed, I grappled with what I'd experienced. I reported the bunker to the authorities, but they dismissed my concerns. They claimed it was likely just an old Cold War relic, nothing to be worried about. There was no mention of the faceless figure, the knife, or the strange disappearances that had plagued the area for years. It was as if the entire incident was being swept under the rug, buried under layers of bureaucracy and willful ignorance. I never returned to Ridgeway Peak after that day. The woods I once found so comforting now felt tainted, hiding secrets I couldn't begin to comprehend. But the memory of what I encountered there never faded. In quiet moments, I can still feel the weight of that blank gaze upon me, still hear those measured footsteps echoing in the depths of the forest. The experience changed me in ways I'm still trying to understand. It shattered my perception of reality, forcing me to confront the possibility that there are things in this world that defy explanation. The government's denial only strengthened my resolve to uncover the truth, though I knew the path would be dangerous. In the years since, I've dedicated myself to researching similar incidents, reaching out to others who've had encounters they can't explain. I've compiled files, cross-referenced reports, and slowly begun to piece together a picture of something much larger and more terrifying than I could have imagined. There are others out there like the creature I encountered, beings that don't fit into our understanding of the world. And there are people, powerful people, who will go to great lengths to keep their existence hidden. But I won't stop searching for answers, because I know what I saw that day in the woods was real, and I know that some secrets don't stay buried forever. As I sit here writing this account, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. Perhaps it's just paranoia, a lingering effect of that day in the woods, or perhaps it's something more. All I know is that the world is a far stranger and more dangerous place than most people realize. And somewhere out there, in the depths of forests or the shadows of abandoned bunkers, there are things waiting to be discovered, things that might be better left hidden. But I can't turn back now. The truth is out there, buried beneath layers of secrecy and denial. And no matter the cost, I'm determined to uncover it, because some hunts never truly end, and some hunters never stop pursuing their prey. In this case, I'm not sure if I'm the hunter or the hunted, but I do know one thing. The game is far from over. Branches whipped at my face, roots threatened to trip me at every step, but I pushed on. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like lead, but the primal fear of what lurked behind me drove me forward. I had no idea how long I ran or in what direction. The woods all looked the same in my panic, an endless maze of trees and shadows. Finally, miraculously, I stumbled onto a familiar stretch of trail. I chanced a glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see that featureless face emerging from the undergrowth. But there was nothing, just the silent, indifferent forest stretching out behind me. I didn't stop running until I reached my truck, and even then I didn't feel safe. I sped away from Ridgeway Peak, not slowing down until I was miles away, and the forest was nothing but a dark smudge in my rearview mirror. In the days that followed, I grappled with what I'd experienced. I reported the bunker to the authorities, but they dismissed my concerns. They claimed it was likely just an old Cold War relic, nothing to be worried about. There was no mention of the faceless figure, the knife, or the strange disappearances that had plagued the area for years. It was as if the entire incident was being swept under the rug, buried under layers of bureaucracy and willful ignorance. I never returned to Ridgeway Peak after that day. The woods I once found so comforting now felt tainted, hiding secrets I couldn't begin to comprehend. But the memory of what I encountered there never faded. In quiet moments, I can still feel the weight of that blank gaze upon me, still hear those measured footsteps echoing in the depths of the forest. The experience changed me in ways I'm still trying to understand. It shattered my perception of reality, forcing me to confront the possibility that there are things in this world that defy explanation. The government's denial only strengthened my resolve to uncover the truth, though I knew the path would be dangerous. In the years since, I've dedicated myself to researching similar incidents, reaching out to others who've had encounters they can't explain. I've compiled files, cross-referenced reports, and slowly begun to piece together a picture of something much larger and more terrifying than I could have imagined. There are others out there like the creature I encountered, beings that don't fit into our understanding of the world. And there are people, powerful people, who will go to great lengths to keep their existence hidden. But I won't stop searching for answers, because I know what I saw that day in the woods was real, and I know that some secrets don't stay buried forever. As I sit here writing this account, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. Perhaps it's just paranoia, a lingering effect of that day in the woods, or perhaps it's something more. All I know is that the world is a far stranger and more dangerous place than most people realize, and somewhere out there, in the depths of forests or the shadows of abandoned bunkers, there are things waiting to be discovered, things that might be better left hidden. But I can't turn back now. The truth is out there, buried beneath layers of secrecy and denial, and no matter the cost, I'm determined to uncover it, because some hunts never truly end, and some hunters never stop pursuing their prey. In this case, I'm not sure if I'm the hunter or the hunted, but I do know one thing: the game is far from over. My name is James Jones, and I am 63 years old. This is the story of what happened to me on August 14th, 1998, and the days that followed. It's a tale that still haunts me to this day, one that changed my life and the lives of everyone in our small town forever. I was a search and rescue officer in a small town in Maine, not far from the Canadian border. Millbrook, as we called it, was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and nothing much happened. It was a town of barely 2,000 souls, nestled between dense forests and rugged mountains. The kind of place where you could leave your doors unlocked at night and not think twice about it. I'd lived in Millbrook all my life. Born and raised here, I'd seen the town change over the decades, but not by much. We got a new stoplight at the intersection of Main and Elm in '85, and the old Miller's General Store became a Walmart in '92, much to the chagrin of the older folks. But other than that, Millbrook remained largely untouched by time. I took to my job as a search and rescue officer with a dedication that some might call obsessive. In a town where the most exciting thing that happened was Mrs. Johnson's cat getting stuck up a tree, I suppose I needed something to pour my energy into. And let me tell you, nothing could have prepared me for that summer. August 14th, 1998, started like any other day. I woke up at 5:30 a.m., just as the first rays of sunlight were beginning to peek over the mountains. My wife, Sarah, was still asleep. We'd been married for 35 years, and she was used to my early mornings by now. I kissed her softly on the forehead before heading downstairs. The house was quiet, save for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the distant chirping of birds outside. I made myself a quick breakfast, 2 eggs over easy and a slice of toast, and washed it down with a cup of strong black coffee. As I ate, I glanced out the kitchen window at the forest that bordered our property. The trees stood tall and dark, their branches swaying gently in the morning breeze. Little did I know that those same trees would soon become the setting for a nightmare. I arrived at the station just before 7 a.m. Our team was small, just me and my buddy Tom, with a couple of volunteers we could call on if needed. Tom was already there, his feet propped up on the desk, a half-eaten donut in one hand and the morning paper in the other. "Morning, James," he said, not looking up from his paper. "Anything exciting happen on your way in? Maybe a squirrel crossed the road?" I chuckled, pouring myself another cup of coffee. This one was stale, having sat in the pot since yesterday afternoon, but I didn't mind. "Not today, Tom, but who knows? Maybe we'll get lucky and have to rescue old Mrs. Johnson's cat again." Tom laughed, finally putting down his paper. "God, I hope not. That beast nearly took my eye out last time." We settled into our usual routine, checking equipment, going over maps of the area, and discussing any potential trouble spots. The summer had been unusually dry, and we were worried about the risk of forest fires. Little did we know that fire would be the least of our worries. It was around 10 a.m. when the call came in. I remember it clearly because I was in the middle of telling Tom about the new fishing lure I'd bought, convinced it was going to help me finally catch that monster trout in Henderson Lake. The phone rang, its shrill tone cutting through our conversation. Tom answered it, his expression quickly changing from bored to concerned. "Slow down, ma'am," he said, reaching for a pen and paper. "What's your name?" "Okay, Mrs. Miller. Now tell me what happened." I watched as Tom jotted down notes, his brow furrowing deeper with each passing moment. When he hung up, he looked at me with a grim expression. "We've got a missing hiker," he said, pushing the paper towards me. "Claire Miller went out for a hike yesterday morning and hasn't returned. Her husband, Hank, is frantic." I felt a twinge of concern. In all my years as a search and rescue officer, we'd had our fair share of missing hikers. Most of the time, they'd simply gotten turned around or maybe twisted an ankle and needed help getting back. But something about Tom's expression told me this was different. "Did she leave a trail plan?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Most locals didn't bother with such formalities, believing they knew the area well enough. Tom shook his head. "Nope, Hank says she's done this hike a dozen times, knows the area like the back of her hand." I sighed, reaching for my gear. "All right, let's head out. We'll meet Hank at the trailhead and get more details." As we drove to the trailhead in our old Jeep Cherokee, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was the unusually still air, or the way the shadows seemed to linger beneath the trees. Whatever it was, it set my nerves on edge. We arrived at the Blackwater Trail parking lot about 20 minutes later. Hank Miller was already there, pacing back and forth next to his pickup truck. He was a wiry guy with a thick beard, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. As soon as we pulled up, Hank rushed over, his eyes wild with worry. "You've got to find her," he said, his voice cracking. "Claire's never been gone this long. Something must have happened." I put a hand on his shoulder, trying to calm him down. "We'll find her, Hank, but first we need you to tell us everything you can about when you last saw Claire and what she was wearing." Hank took a deep breath, running a hand through his beard. "She left yesterday morning around 8 a.m., said she was going to do the Blackwater Loop, like she's done 100 times before. She was wearing hiking boots, jeans, a blue t-shirt, and a red scarf. She had a small backpack with water and some snacks." Tom jotted down the details while I studied the trailhead map. The Blackwater Loop was a popular hiking trail about 10 miles long. It led up through dense forest along the edge of a steep ridge and then back down to the parking lot. Under normal circumstances, it would take an experienced hiker like Claire about 5-6 hours to complete. "When did you realize something was wrong?" I asked Hank. He shook his head, his eyes filling with tears. "She said she'd be back by dinner. When she wasn't home by 8 p.m., I started to worry. I drove out here, but her car was still in the lot. I hiked a bit of the trail calling her name, but it was getting dark. I should have called you guys sooner. I thought maybe she'd just lost track of time, you know?" I nodded, understanding his hesitation. In a small town like ours, people often tried to handle things on their own before calling for help. But now, Claire had been missing for over 24 hours, and every minute counted. "All right, Hank," I said, grabbing my pack from the Jeep. "Tom and I are going to head out now. We've called in a couple of volunteers to help with the search. I need you to stay here at the trailhead. If Claire makes it back on her own, I want you to be here to meet her. Can you do that?" Hank nodded, though I could see he wanted to come with us. Yeah, I can do that. Just find her, okay? I promised we would, but as Tom and I set out on the trail, I couldn't shake the feeling that this search was going to be anything but routine. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees casting long shadows across the path. And somewhere in those woods, Claire Miller was waiting to be found. Little did I know that this was just the beginning of a nightmare that would change our town forever. The Blackwater Trail started innocently enough. The first mile or so was well maintained, with clear markers and even a few benches for hikers to rest. But as Tom and I pushed deeper into the forest, the trail became rougher, the undergrowth thicker. We called out Claire's name every few minutes, our voices echoing through the trees. But the only response was the occasional chirp of a bird or the rustle of leaves in the breeze. "You think she could have fallen off the ridge?" Tom asked as we paused to check our map. I shook my head. Unlikely. Hank said she's done this hike many times. She'd know to be careful there. We pressed on, our eyes scanning the ground for any sign of disturbance. A broken twig, a scuff mark, anything that might indicate Claire had passed through. But the forest floor was frustratingly pristine. As the hours ticked by, my concern grew. We should have found some trace of her by now. Even if she had gotten turned around, she should have eventually made her way back to the main trail. It was late afternoon when we reached the ridge. The view from up here was breathtaking, miles of unbroken forest stretching out to the horizon, the mountains looming in the distance. On any other day, I might have paused to admire it, but today, all I could think about was Claire, lost somewhere in that vast expanse of wilderness. "James," Tom called out, his voice tight, "you need to see this." I hurried over to where he was crouched near the edge of the ridge. At first I didn't see what had caught his attention, but then I noticed it. A small scrap of red fabric caught on a thorny bush. "You think it's from her scarf?" Tom asked as I carefully untangled the fabric. I nodded grimly. "Looks like it, but why would she have come this close to the edge?" We searched the area thoroughly, calling Claire's name with renewed urgency, but there was no response, no other sign of her passage. As the light began to fade, we were forced to make a difficult decision. It wasn't safe to continue searching in the dark, especially in such treacherous terrain. "We need to head back," I said, hating the words even as I spoke them. "We'll come back at first light with more people." Tom nodded, his face etched with worry. "I don't like leaving her out here, James." "Neither do I," I replied. "But we won't do her any good if we get lost or injured ourselves." We made our way back to the trailhead in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. I couldn't shake the image of Claire, alone in the darkening forest. Was she hurt, lost, or had something more sinister befallen her? Hank was still at the parking lot when we returned, pacing back and forth. The hope in his eyes when he saw us approach quickly turned to despair when he realized Claire wasn't with us. "You didn't find her," he said, his voice hollow. I put a hand on his shoulder. "We found a piece of fabric that might be from her scarf. We'll go back out at first light with more searchers. We'll find her, Hank." He nodded, but I could see the fear in his eyes. "Can I come with you tomorrow?" I hesitated. Having family members join searches could be complicated. They often pushed themselves too hard, took unnecessary risks. But I could see the determination in Hank's face. "All right," I said. "But you follow our lead, understood? No going off on your own." He agreed readily, and we made plans to meet back at the trailhead at dawn. As Tom and I drove back to the station, the forest seemed to loom around us, darker and more menacing than I'd ever seen it. That night, as I lay in bed next to Sarah, sleep eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Claire lost and alone in the woods. And beneath that worry was a growing sense of unease, a feeling that we were missing something, that there was more to Claire's disappearance than a simple hiking accident. Little did I know how right I was, or how much our lives were about to change. The next morning dawned gray and misty. I was already awake when my alarm went off at 4:30 a.m., having barely slept. Sarah stirred beside me as I got up. "Be careful out there," she murmured, her eyes still heavy with sleep. I leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Always am. I'll call you when I can." The drive to the station was eerily quiet. The streets of Millbrook were empty, the shops dark. Only the 24-hour diner showed any signs of life. a lone truck driver visible through the window, nursing a cup of coffee. Tom was waiting for me at the station, along with 4 volunteers, Mike and Sarah Johnson, a married couple who ran the local hardware store, and brothers Pete and Dave Thompson, who worked as loggers. All of them had search and rescue training, and I was glad to have them with us. We went over the search plan, dividing the area into grids. We'd start from where we'd found the scrap of fabric and work our way outwards. I stressed the importance of staying in radio contact and not taking any unnecessary risks. "Remember," I said as we finished our briefing, "our priority is finding Claire, but we also need to make sure all of us get home safe. Any questions?" There were none. We loaded up our gear and headed out to the trailhead. Hank was already there when we arrived, looking like he hadn't slept a wink. I couldn't blame him. The worry etched on his face made him look a decade older than his actual age. "Any news?" he asked as soon as we pulled up. I shook my head. "Nothing yet, Hank, but we've got more people today. We'll find her." We split into 3 teams, Tom with Mike and Sarah, Pete and Dave together, and Hank with me. As we set off into the misty forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into something we didn't understand. The morning passed slowly. We combed through the underbrush, calling Claire's name until our voices were hoarse, but the forest remained stubbornly silent. It was around noon when we stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold. We were about a mile from where we'd found the scarf, in an area of particularly dense undergrowth, when Hank called out, "James, over here!" I pushed through a thicket of brambles to find Hank crouched over something on the ground. As I got closer, I saw what had caught his attention. A small clearing, maybe 10 feet across, where the undergrowth had been flattened. "Could be where she camped," Hank said, hope creeping into his voice. But as I surveyed the scene, I felt a growing sense of unease. This didn't look like any campsite I'd ever seen. There was no sign of a fire, no discarded food wrappers or water bottles. And the way the vegetation was flattened, it looked more like something had thrashed around here. "Hank," I said slowly, "did Claire have a tent with her?" He shook his head. "No, just her day pack. Why?" I didn't answer immediately, my eyes scanning the clearing. That's when I saw it, a glint of metal half hidden under a fallen leaf. I walked over and carefully brushed the leaf aside. It was a small gold locket. Hank let out a choked sound when he saw it. "That's Claire's," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I gave it to her on our 20th anniversary." I bagged the locket carefully, my mind racing. This clearing, the way the vegetation was flattened, the lost locket, none of it made sense for a hiker who had simply gotten lost. "Hank," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "I need you to think carefully. Is there any reason Claire might have left the trail? Any place out here she might have wanted to visit?" He shook his head, confusion and fear warring on his face. "No, nothing. She always stuck to the trail. Said it wasn't worth the risk of getting lost." I nodded, keying my radio. "Tom, Pete, you copy?" "Go ahead, James," Tom's voice crackled back. "We've found something. A clearing about a mile northeast of where we found the scarf. Looks like there might have been some kind of disturbance here. We also found Claire's locket." There was a moment of silence before Tom replied. "Copy that. We'll head your way. Pete, Dave, you get that?" "Yeah, we're on our way." Pete's gruff voice came through. I turned back to Hank, who was staring at the clearing with a mixture of hope and dread. "We'll find her," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "This is the first real clue we've had." But as we waited for the others to arrive, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were dealing with something far more sinister than a lost hiker. When Tom arrived with Mike and Sarah, followed shortly by Pete and Dave, we did a thorough search of the clearing and the surrounding area. But aside from the flattened vegetation and Claire's locket, we found nothing. "What do you think happened here, James?" Tom asked quietly, pulling me aside. I shook my head. "I don't know. But whatever it was, I don't think Claire left this clearing voluntarily." Tom's face paled. "You think someone took her?" "I think we need to consider all possibilities," I replied grimly. "Let's expand the search. Whatever happened here, it can't have been too long ago. The vegetation hasn't had time to spring back up." We split up again, this time spreading out in a wider arc around the clearing. I paired Hank with Tom this time, worried about how he might react if we found anything else. As the afternoon wore on, the forest seemed to grow darker, the shadows deeper. The trees loomed over us, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. More than once I caught myself jumping at the snap of a twig or the rustle of leaves. It was nearing dusk when my radio crackled to life. "James, it's Pete. You need to see this." Something in his voice sent a chill down my spine. "Where are you?" "About half a mile northwest of the clearing. There's a cave here." I quickened my pace, pushing through the underbrush. "I'm on my way." Everyone else converge on Pete and Dave's location. When I arrived, I found Pete and Dave standing at the mouth of a small cave, half hidden behind a curtain of vines. The entrance was narrow, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. "Did you go inside?" I asked, catching my breath. Pete shook his head. "No, we waited for you. But James, we found this." He held out his hand. In it was a torn piece of blue fabric, the same color as the t-shirt Claire had been wearing. By now the others had arrived. Hank let out a strangled cry when he saw the fabric. "That's Claire's shirt," he said, his voice breaking. "We have to go in there." I held up a hand. "Hold on, Hank. We don't know what's in there. We need to be careful." I turned to the group. "Tom, you're with me. We'll go in first. The rest of you stay here. If you don't hear from us in 15 minutes, call for backup." Hank started to protest, but Tom cut him off. "James is right, Hank. Let us check it out first." I switched on my flashlight and squeezed through the cave entrance, Tom close behind me. The air inside was cool and damp, with a musty smell that made me wrinkle my nose. As we moved deeper into the cave, the beam of my flashlight revealed something that made my heart skip a beat. There on the cave floor were footprints, lots of them. Some looked human, but others were like nothing I'd ever seen before. "Tom," I whispered, "are you seeing this?" He nodded, his face pale in the flashlight beam. "What the hell made those tracks, James?" Before I could answer, we heard something that made us both freeze. It was a low, guttural sound, somewhere between a growl and a moan, and it was coming from deeper in the cave. "Claire?" I called out, my voice echoing off the cave walls. "Claire, are you in here?" The sound came again, louder this time, but it wasn't Claire's voice. It wasn't human at all. "James," Tom said, his voice tight with fear, "I think we should get out of here." I nodded, backing up slowly. "Yeah, I think you're right." But as we turned to leave, my flashlight beam caught something that made my blood run cold. There, scratched into the cave wall, were words, "Help me, it's still here." And below the words was a crude drawing of a creature that looked like something out of a nightmare. We scrambled out of the cave, our hearts pounding. The others were waiting anxiously, Hank practically vibrating with tension. "Did you find her?" he asked as soon as we emerged. "Did you find Claire?" I shook my head, trying to catch my breath. "No, but we found something I can't explain." As I recounted what we'd seen in the cave, I could see the disbelief on their faces. But there was fear there too, a growing realization that we were dealing with something far beyond our understanding. "We need to call in help," I said finally. This is beyond us." But even as I said it, I knew that whatever was happening in these woods, whatever had taken Claire, it was something that no amount of outside help could prepare us for. As we made our way back to the trailhead in the gathering darkness, the forest seemed alive around us. Every shadow held a potential threat, every sound a hidden danger. And somewhere out there, Claire was still missing, along with something else, something that, until today, I would have said couldn't possibly exist. Little did I know our nightmare was only just beginning. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. We called in state police, park rangers, even a team of spelunkers to explore the cave system. But despite all our efforts, we found no further sign of Claire. The cave yielded no more clues beyond what Tom and I had initially discovered. The strange footprints, the scratched message, even the unsettling drawing, all were documented, photographed, and analyzed. But no one could offer a satisfactory explanation for what we'd seen. Hank was a wreck. He barely ate or slept, spending every waking moment at the search base we'd set up near the trailhead. I tried to convince him to go home and rest, but he refused. "I can't leave," he said, his eyes red-rimmed and haunted. "What if she comes back and I'm not here?" I couldn't argue with him. If it were Sarah out there, wild horses couldn't have dragged me away. It was on the 5th day of the search that things took an even darker turn. I was at the base, poring over maps with Tom, when my radio crackled to life. "James?" It was Mike Johnson's voice, tight with barely controlled panic. "James, we need help. Something's happened to Sarah." I was on my feet in an instant. "Mike, what's going on? Where are you?" "We're about 2 miles east of the cave," Mike replied, his voice shaking. "We were searching the area when, God, James, I don't know what happened. One minute she was right behind me, and the next—" "Hang tight, Mike," I said, already grabbing my gear. "We're on our way." Tom and I, along with a state trooper named Rodriguez, headed out immediately. As we crashed through the underbrush, my mind was racing. What could have happened to Sarah? She was an experienced hiker and search and rescue volunteer. She wouldn't have just wandered off. We found Mike about 20 minutes later. He was standing in a small clearing, his face ashen, his hands shaking as he clutched his radio. "Mike," I said, approaching him slowly, "what happened? Where's Sarah?" He turned to me, his eyes wide with fear. "She's gone, James, just gone. We were walking and I heard her scream. When I turned around, there was nothing, just this." He held out his hand. In it was Sarah's radio, smeared with what looked horribly like blood. "Jesus," Tom muttered, taking the radio and bagging it carefully. "Mike, did you see anything, hear anything?" Mike shook his head. "Nothing, just Sarah's scream and then silence." We searched the area thoroughly but found no trace of Sarah. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing to indicate which way she might have gone or been taken. As we widened our search, the forest seemed to close in around us. The trees loomed overhead, their branches casting strange, shifting shadows. More than once I caught a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye, only to turn and find nothing there. It was nearing dusk when Rodriguez called out, "Over here, I found something." We hurried over to where he was standing, at the base of a large oak tree. There, carved into the trunk, were words that made my blood run cold. "It's hungry. Run." Below the words was the same crude drawing we'd seen in the cave. "What the hell is going on here?" Rodriguez asked, his hand instinctively moving to his holstered weapon. I shook my head, unable to find words. Whatever we were dealing with, it was clear now that it wasn't just Claire who was in danger. It was all of us. We made our way back to the base as night fell, the forest alive with sounds that seemed far more menacing than they had just days ago. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. When we arrived, we found the base in chaos. While we'd been out searching for Sarah, 2 hikers had gone missing from a trail on the other side of the forest, and a local farmer reported that something had attacked his livestock, leaving behind carcasses that had been torn apart with almost surgical precision. As I stood there listening to the reports flooding in, I felt a weight settling onto my shoulders. This was no longer just a search and rescue operation. We were facing something dangerous, something that defied explanation. I pulled Tom aside. "We need to call in more help," I said, keeping my voice low. "Whatever this is, it's spreading. We're out of our depth here." Tom nodded grimly. "Who do we call? The FBI?" I shook my head. "I'm thinking, look, this is going to sound crazy, but I think we need to call in some experts on unusual phenomena." Tom's eyebrows shot up. "You mean like ghost hunters? Bigfoot chasers?" "I mean people who deal with things that can't be easily explained," I replied, "because right now I'm fresh out of explanations." As I made the call, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were standing on the precipice of something monumental, something that would change not just our town, but our understanding of the world itself. Little did I know just how right I was. The experts arrived 2 days later. Dr. Elena Vasquez was a cryptozoologist from the University of Washington, and her partner, Dr. Marcus Chen, specialized in folklore and urban legends. They pulled up to our makeshift command center in a battered Jeep loaded down with equipment I couldn't even begin to identify. "Mr. Jones?" Dr. Vasquez said as she approached, her hand outstretched. "I'm Dr. Elena Vasquez, and this is my colleague, Dr. Marcus Chen. We came as soon as we got your call." I shook her hand, noting the firm grip and the keen intelligence in her eyes. "Thank you for coming. I know this all must sound pretty far-fetched." Dr. Chen interrupted with a wry smile. "Mr. Jones, we've heard far-fetched. This sounds fascinating." We spent the next few hours bringing them up to speed on everything that had happened. They listened intently, occasionally exchanging glances that I couldn't quite interpret. "And you're certain about the footprints in the cave?" Dr. Vasquez asked, her brow furrowed in concentration. "They were definitely not human or any known animal?" I nodded. "I've been tracking animals in these woods for over 30 years. I've never seen anything like these prints." Dr. Chen was leafing through the photos we'd taken. "And this drawing," he said, holding up the picture of the crude image from the cave. "You've seen it twice now." "3 times, Tom corrected. We found another one carved into a tree where Sarah Johnson disappeared." The 2 scientists exchanged another one of those unreadable glances. "Mr. Jones," Dr. Vasquez said slowly, "I think we need to see this cave for ourselves." We set out early the next morning. In addition to the 2 scientists, I brought along Tom and Rodriguez. Hank had wanted to come, but I managed to convince him to stay behind. The poor man was running on fumes, and I was worried he might do something rash if we found anything in the cave. The forest seemed different now. The familiar trails felt alien, every shadow potentially hiding some unknown threat. Even the birdsong seemed muted, as if the wildlife could sense the wrongness that had invaded their home. As we approached the cave entrance, Dr. Vasquez pulled out a strange device that looked like a cross between a Geiger counter and a transistor radio. It emitted a soft pulsing hum as she waved it around the cave mouth. "Interesting," she murmured. "Marcus, are you getting this?" Dr. Chen nodded, his eyes fixed on a tablet he was holding. "Definitely not baseline. This is, well, it's not like anything we've seen before." "Care to share with the class?" Rodriguez asked, his hand resting uneasily on his holstered weapon. Dr. Vasquez looked up, seeming almost surprised to remember we were there. "Oh, of course, this device measures certain, let's call them anomalies in the local environment. Electromagnetic fluctuations, quantum irregularities, that sort of thing. And right now it's indicating that this cave is practically humming with unusual energy." I exchanged a glance with Tom. This was starting to sound less like science and more like science fiction. We entered the cave cautiously, our flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. The air was cooler inside with that same musty smell I remembered from before. But now there was something else. A faint metallic tang that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Dr. Vasquez's device was humming louder now, its display flashing with symbols I didn't understand. Dr. Chen was taking samples of the cave wall, carefully scraping tiny amounts into labeled vials. We reached the spot where Tom and I had seen the strange footprints and the scratched message. But to our shock, both were gone. The cave floor was smooth, undisturbed, and the wall where the message had been was blank. "This is impossible," I said, running my hand over the smooth stone. "It was right here. Tom, you saw it too, right?" Tom nodded, his face pale in the flashlight beam. "Yeah, it was definitely here. How could it just disappear?" Dr. Vasquez was waving her device over the area, her brow furrowed in concentration. "This is unprecedented," she murmured. "The energy readings here are off the charts." Suddenly her device emitted a high-pitched whine. At the same moment, we all felt it, a deep, subsonic rumble that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "What the hell was that?" Rodriguez asked, his voice tight with tension. Before anyone could answer, we heard it, a sound that made my blood run cold. It was the same guttural, inhuman noise Tom and I had heard on our first visit to the cave, but this time it was louder, closer, and it was coming from deeper in the cave. "We need to get out of here," I said, already backing towards the entrance. "Now!" But as we turned to leave, our flashlight beams caught something that stopped us in our tracks. There, on the cave wall, words were appearing as if carved by an invisible hand. "Too late. It's here." And below the words, that nightmarish drawing began to take shape. We ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. We ran as fast as we could, scrambling out of the cave and into the fading daylight. But even as we emerged, gasping for breath, we all knew it. Whatever was in that cave, whatever had taken Claire and Sarah and who knows how many others, it wasn't content to stay hidden anymore. It was coming for us all. The mood back at the command center was tense. News of what had happened in the cave had spread quickly, and I could see the fear in everyone's eyes. Even the usually unflappable Tom looked shaken. Dr. Vasquez and Dr. Chen had sequestered themselves in a corner, poring over their data and speaking in hushed, urgent tones. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but their expressions were grim. Hank approached me, his eyes wild with a mixture of hope and fear. "James, what happened out there? Did you find anything about Claire?" I hesitated, unsure of how much to tell him. But Hank deserved the truth, no matter how strange or terrifying it might be. "Hank," I said, leading him to a quiet corner, "I'm not sure how to explain this, but something's happening in these woods, something I can't explain." I told him everything, the disappearing footprints and message, the strange energy readings, and the words that had appeared on the cave wall as if by magic. As I spoke, I watched the color drain from Hank's face. "What are you saying, James?" he whispered. That some kind of monster took Claire?" Before I could answer, Dr. Vasquez approached us, her face set in a grim expression. "Mr. Jones, Mr. Miller, I think we need to talk. All of us." She gathered everyone in the command center, the search and rescue team, the state troopers, even the volunteers. Once we were all assembled, she took a deep breath. "What I'm about to tell you is going to sound impossible," she began, "but I assure you it's very real and very dangerous." Dr. Chen stepped forward, holding up a tablet displaying a series of complex graphs and charts. "Our readings from the cave, combined with the eyewitness accounts and physical evidence, all point to one conclusion," he said. "We're dealing with a transdimensional entity." A murmur of confusion rippled through the group. "A what?" Rodriguez asked, voicing what we were all thinking. Dr. Vasquez held up a hand for silence. "A being from another dimension," she explained. "A reality parallel to our own, but fundamentally different. Somehow a doorway has opened between our world and theirs, allowing this entity to cross over." I felt my head spinning. This sounded like something out of a science fiction novel, not real life. But after what I'd seen in that cave, I couldn't dismiss it outright. "So what does this entity want?" Tom asked, his voice tight with tension. Dr. Chen's expression was grim. "Based on the pattern of disappearances and the messages left behind, we believe it's feeding, gathering energy or life force from our world to sustain itself." A chill ran down my spine as the implications of his words sank in. Claire, Sarah, the missing hikers. They weren't just lost. They had been taken, consumed. "How do we stop it?" I asked, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. Dr. Vasquez and Dr. Chen exchanged a look. "We're not sure," Dr. Vasquez admitted. "In theory, if we can locate the dimensional breach, we might be able to close it, trapping the entity on the other side, but..." "But what?" Hank demanded, his voice cracking with emotion. "But we don't know what effect that would have on those who have been taken," Dr. Chen finished quietly. "They might be trapped on the other side as well." The silence that followed was deafening. I looked around at the faces of my friends and neighbors, seeing the same mix of fear, disbelief, and determination that I felt. "So what do we do?" I asked finally. Dr. Vasquez straightened her shoulders. "We find the breach, we study it, and we figure out a way to close it without losing anyone else." It sounded impossible, but as I looked around at the determined faces surrounding me, I knew we had no choice. Whatever this thing was, wherever it had come from, we had to stop it. For Claire, for Sarah, for all those who had been taken, and for those who might be next if we failed. As we began to plan our next move, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were about to embark on the most dangerous mission of our lives. The forest that had been my home for so long had become alien, hostile territory, and somewhere out there, a creature beyond our understanding was waiting. The hunt was on. But who, I wondered, was really the hunter, and who was the prey? The next few days were a flurry of activity. Dr. Vasquez and Dr. Chen set up a perimeter of sensors around the area where we'd experienced the most activity, hoping to triangulate the location of the dimensional breach. The rest of us continued our search efforts, but now with a new, terrifying awareness of what we might encounter. We moved in groups, never letting anyone out of sight for even a moment. The forest, once so familiar and comforting, now felt like an alien landscape. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound a potential threat. It was on the third day after our encounter in the cave that the sensors picked up something. a massive spike in energy readings centered on a location about 5 miles northeast of the cave. "This is it," Dr. Vasquez said, her eyes gleaming with a mix of excitement and fear as she showed us the readouts. "The breach, it's active." We assembled a team quickly. Myself, Tom, Rodriguez, Dr. Vasquez, and Dr. Chen would go in. Despite my protests, Hank insisted on coming too. "That's my wife out there," he said, his jaw set with determination. "I'm going." As we prepared to head out, I pulled Sarah aside. My wife's face was etched with worry, but she managed a small smile. "You be careful out there, James," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Come back to me." I pulled her close, breathing in her familiar scent. "I will," I promised. "We'll end this. Tonight." The hike to the location was tense. We moved as quietly as possible, our senses on high alert. As we got closer, I began to feel something, a sort of pressure in the air, like the feeling just before a thunderstorm breaks. "You feel that?" Tom muttered beside me. I nodded grimly. "Yeah, we're getting close." We crested a small hill, and there it was. In a small clearing ahead, the air seemed to shimmer and twist, like heat waves rising from hot asphalt. But this was no mirage. As we watched, the distortion grew, stretching and warping until it tore open like a wound in the fabric of reality itself. Through the tear, I caught glimpses of something. A landscape both alien and familiar, like our world reflected in a shattered mirror. And moving within that impossible space were shapes, dark, writhing forms that hurt the eye to look at directly. "My God," Dr. Chen breathed. "It's beautiful." "Beautiful?" Rodriguez hissed. "It's a nightmare." Dr. Vasquez was already setting up equipment, her hands shaking slightly as she worked. "We need to take readings," she said. "Figure out how to close it." But before we could do anything, a sound cut through the air, a scream, human and terrifyingly familiar. "Claire," Hank yelled, starting forward. I grabbed his arm, holding him back. "Hank, wait, we don't know what's on the other side." But even as I said it, I knew it was useless. We could all see the figure now, visible through the tear in reality. Claire, or something that looked like her, stumbling towards us with arms outstretched. "Help me," her voice called, echoing strangely. "Please help me." Hank tore free from my grasp and ran towards the breach. "Claire," he yelled, "I'm coming." "Hank, no," I shouted, but it was too late. As Hank reached the shimmering border of the breach, a dark shape emerged from behind Claire. It was the creature from the cave drawings, but 1,000 times more terrifying in its reality. A mass of writhing tentacles and too many eyes, it moved with a speed that belied its size. In an instant, it had Hank. He screamed, a sound of pure terror that cut off abruptly as the creature pulled him through the breach. "No!" I yelled, starting forward myself, but Tom and Rodriguez held me back. "James, don't!" Tom shouted. "We'll lose you too." The creature turned its attention to us, a multitude of eyes focusing with alien intelligence. I felt my mind reeling, unable to comprehend what I was seeing, and then it spoke, not with words but directly into our minds, a voice that was ancient and hungry and utterly inhuman. "More," it said, "need more." Dr. Vasquez was frantically working her equipment. "The energy signatures are spiking," she yelled over the now howling wind. "If we don't close it now, it'll tear this whole area apart." "But Hank," I shouted, "Claire, we can't just leave them." Dr. Chen grabbed my shoulder. "James, listen to me. If we don't close this now, that thing will come through, and then no one will be safe." I looked back at the breach, at the writhing horror that waited on the other side, at the fading images of Hank and Claire, already being pulled deeper into that impossible space. With a heart full of lead, I nodded. "Do it," I said. "Close it." Dr. Vasquez activated her device. A high-pitched whine filled the air and the breach began to shrink. The creature roared in our minds, a sound of fury and frustration. As the tear in reality closed, I caught one last glimpse of Hank and Claire. They were looking back at us, their eyes wide with terror and accusation, and then they were gone. The breach snapped shut with a thunderclap that knocked us all off our feet. For a moment, silence reigned. Then, slowly, the normal sounds of the forest began to return. Birds chirping, leaves rustling in the breeze. I got to my feet slowly, my whole body aching. The others were doing the same, all of us shell-shocked by what we just witnessed. Is it over? Rodriguez asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Vasquez checked her equipment. The readings are back to normal, she said. I think we did it. But as I looked around at the clearing, now peaceful and ordinary, I felt no sense of victory. We had stopped the creature, closed the breach. But at what cost? Hank was gone. Claire was gone. And who knew how many others lost to a realm beyond our understanding? As we made our way back to town, I struggled with how to explain what had happened, how to tell Sarah and the others about Hank's fate, how to live with the knowledge of what lurked just beyond the veil of our reality. The forest was quiet now, but I knew I would never see it the same way again, and as the first lights of town came into view, I realized that our ordeal wasn't over. It was just beginning. It's been 5 years since that night in the forest. 5 years since we closed the breach and said goodbye to Hank, Claire, and all the others lost to that other world. Millbrook has changed. The events of that summer left scars on our town that may never fully heal. The forest, once a place of comfort and familiarity, is now viewed with suspicion and fear. Few venture deep into the woods anymore, and those who do always return with haunted eyes. Dr. Vasquez and Dr. Chen stayed for a while, studying the aftermath of the breach. They found lingering energy signatures, echoes of that other world. But gradually, even those faded away. They left eventually, moving on to study other phenomena, other mysteries. As for me, I retired from search and rescue. I couldn't bear the thought of entering those woods again, of facing the memories of what we'd lost. Sarah and I moved into town, away from the forest's edge. But even now, on quiet nights, I sometimes think I hear something, a whisper on the wind, a voice calling from just beyond the veil of reality. Tom stuck it out longer than I did, but even he eventually stepped down. It's not the same, he told me over beers one night. Every time I'm out there, I'm just waiting for something to happen, for that thing to come back. The official story is that Hank and Claire, along with the others who disappeared that summer, were victims of a tragic series of accidents. Wild animal attacks, the reports say, getting lost in unexplored cave systems. It's easier for people to believe that than the truth. But those of us who were there, who saw what really happened, we know better. We carry the weight of that knowledge every day. Sometimes, in my darkest moments, I wonder if we did the right thing. If we should have tried harder to save Hank and Claire, even at the risk of letting that creature into our world. But then I remember the hunger in its voice, the alien intelligence in its eyes, and I know we had no choice. The breach is closed. The entity is trapped on the other side, but sometimes when I look out at the forest that was once my home, I can't help but wonder, are we really safe? Or is it just biding its time, waiting for another chance to break through? And what will happen when it does? As I sit here writing down this account of what happened that summer, I realize that it's not just a record of events, it's a warning. Because I know deep in my bones that what we experienced in Millbrook was just the beginning. There are more things in heaven and earth than we can possibly imagine, and some of them are hungry. So to whoever reads this, I say, be vigilant, watch the shadows, listen to the whispers on the wind. And if you ever find yourself in a quiet forest where the birds have gone silent and the air feels heavy with something you can't quite explain, run, and don't look back, because you never know what might be looking back at you. My name is Thomas Garcia, and I am 76 years old. What I'm about to tell you happened to me in 2015, when I was 67. I've kept this story to myself for years, but now, as I feel the weight of time pressing down on me, I realize it needs to be told. Whether you choose to believe it or not is up to you. All I can say is that every word is true as the scars on my body and the nightmares that still wake me in the dead of night. I was a Navy SEAL, stationed in Coronado, California. We were the best of the best, trained to handle anything the world could throw at us, or so we thought. Nothing could have prepared us for what we encountered in the Nevada desert. Nothing. It was a sweltering July morning when Captain Jonas Frost called us into the briefing room. Jonas was a legend among SEALs, cool under pressure, sharp as a tack, and built like a brick wall. His steel-gray eyes scanned the room as we filed in, taking in each of us with a nod. "All right, gentlemen," he began, his voice gruff from years of barking orders and inhaling sand in far-flung war zones. "We've got a situation." The room fell silent. When Jonas said we had a situation, it usually meant things were about to get interesting. "We've received intel about a suspected terrorist cell operating out of an abandoned military base in Nevada," he continued, pulling up a satellite image on the screen behind him, "near Area 51. A few chuckles rippled through the room. Area 51 was the stuff of conspiracy theories and bad sci-fi movies. But one look at Jonas's face told us this was no joke. "Yeah, I know how it sounds," he said, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "But we've got our orders. We go in, we neutralize any hostiles, we gather intel, and we get out. Simple as that." Simple. Right. Nothing was ever simple in our line of work. Jonas pointed to each of us in turn. "Garcia, Beltran, Heller, Kent, you're with me on this one. We move out at 0500 tomorrow. Any questions?" We all shook our heads. We'd been through countless missions together, and we trusted Jonas with our lives. Little did we know that this trust would be put to the ultimate test in the days to come. As we filed out of the briefing room, I caught up with Joe Axel Beltran. Axel was built like a tank, with biceps the size of my head and a chest like a barrel. But despite his intimidating appearance, he was one of the kindest men I'd ever met. "What do you make of this, Thomas?" he asked, his brow furrowed. I shrugged. "Sounds like a wild goose chase to me. But orders are orders, right?" Axel nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. It was the same doubt I felt gnawing at the pit of my stomach. Marcus Doc Heller joined us, adjusting his glasses. Doc was our medic, a brilliant guy with steady hands and a calm demeanor that had saved our asses more times than I could count. "You guys getting weird vibes from this mission too?" he asked in a low voice. I nodded. "Something doesn't feel right." "Come on, you two," Ethan Ghost Kent chimed in, seeming to materialize out of nowhere. Ghost was our sniper, silent as a shadow and twice as deadly. "It's just another day at the office. We go in, we do our job, we come home. Simple as that." If only it had been that simple. We took off at dawn the next day, the chopper blade slicing through the cool morning air. As we flew over the Nevada desert, I watched the landscape change beneath us. Lush coastal vegetation gave way to barren stretches of sand and rock, broken only by the occasional scrub brush or lonely cactus. The sun climbed higher in the sky, turning the air into a shimmering haze. By the time we touched down several miles from our target, the heat was already oppressive. We disembarked quickly, our boots kicking up small clouds of dust as we hit the ground. Jonas gathered us around, his voice low but clear over the fading sound of the helicopter rotors. "All right, listen up. We've got a 5-mile hike ahead of us. Keep your eyes open and stay alert. This may be the middle of nowhere, but that doesn't mean we're alone out here." We nodded, checking our gear one last time before setting out. The weight of our packs and body armor felt heavier than usual in the desert heat. Sweat began to bead on my forehead almost immediately, and I could feel it trickling down my back. As we marched, the silence of the desert pressed in around us. There was no birdsong, no rustle of wind through leaves, just the crunch of our boots on the rocky ground and our own measured breathing. It was as if the very air was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Axel fell into step beside me, his massive frame casting a shadow that provided momentary relief from the sun. "You ever been out this way before, Thomas?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head. "Nah, closest I've been is Vegas, and that was a whole different kind of desert." Axel chuckled softly. "Yeah, I bet. This place, it's something else, like being on another planet." He wasn't wrong. The landscape around us was alien and forbidding. Jagged rock formations jutted up from the earth like the broken teeth of some giant prehistoric beast. In the distance, heat mirages shimmered, creating the illusion of water where there was only more sand and stone. We walked for hours, the sun climbing higher in the sky until it felt like we were walking on the surface of the sun itself. My throat was parched, my skin felt tight and hot, and every step was an effort of will. But we pressed on, driven by our training and the knowledge that our mission could mean the difference between life and death for countless innocent people. As we crested a small rise, Jonas held up a fist, the signal to stop. We dropped to our knees, scanning the horizon. In the distance, barely visible through the heat haze, was a squat gray building, our target. "There it is," Jonas murmured, pulling out his binoculars. "Doesn't look like much, does it?" Ghost, who had been silent for most of the journey, spoke up. "Looks can be deceiving, Cap. You know that better than anyone." Jonas nodded, a grim smile on his face. "That I do, Kent. That I do." He turned to face us, his expression serious. "All right, we'll approach from the east. Use what cover we can. Keep your eyes open for any sign of movement or surveillance. Questions?" We shook our heads. We'd been through this drill 100 times before. But as we started moving again, I couldn't shake the feeling that this time was different. This time we were walking into something we couldn't possibly understand. Little did I know how right I was. As we drew closer to the base, the sense of wrongness grew stronger. The building was a relic from another era, its concrete walls weathered and cracked, windows long since shattered. Sand had piled up against one side, as if the desert itself was trying to reclaim this intrusion into its domain. We approached cautiously, using what little cover the barren landscape provided. Ghost took point, his keen eyes scanning for any sign of movement or danger. The rest of us followed in a loose formation, weapons at the ready. When we reached the perimeter fence, we found it rusted and sagging, with large gaps that we could easily slip through. It was as if whoever had once guarded this place had simply walked away, leaving it to the mercy of the elements. "I don't like this," Axel muttered, as we made our way towards the main entrance. "Where are the terrorists? Where's anybody?" Doc nodded in agreement. "It's too quiet, even for the desert." Jonas held up a hand, signaling for silence. We froze, listening intently. For a moment all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart, and the soft whisper of sand shifting in the breeze. Then, faintly, I heard something else. A low hum, barely audible, coming from somewhere inside the building. "You hear that?" I whispered. Jonas nodded, his face grim. "All right, we go in quiet, standard sweep pattern, watch each other's backs." We moved forward, our boots crunching softly on the sand-covered concrete. The main entrance was a pair of heavy metal doors, one hanging askew on its hinges. As we approached, I noticed strange markings etched into the metal, symbols I didn't recognize, curved lines and angular shapes that seemed to shift and move when I wasn't looking directly at them. "Cap," I said, gesturing towards the markings. "You ever seen anything like this before?" Jonas studied the door for a moment, his brow furrowed. "Can't say that I have, Garcia. Some kind of code, maybe?" Doc leaned in for a closer look, adjusting his glasses. "These don't look like any language I've ever seen. And look at the way the metal's warped around them. It's like they were burned into the door somehow." "We can play archaeologist later," Ghost cut in, his voice tense. "Right now, we need to focus on the mission." Jonas nodded. "Ghost is right. We'll document everything once we've secured the area. Axel, you're on point. Let's move." Axel stepped forward, easing the door open with a soft groan of protesting metal. The sound seemed to echo in the stillness, and we all winced. But there was no response from inside, no sudden flurry of movement or shouts of alarm. We entered the building in a tight formation, our night vision goggles allowing us to see in the gloom. The interior was a mess of fallen ceiling tiles, broken furniture, and layers of dust. But beneath the decay, I could see signs of the building's former purpose. Banks of computers lined the walls, their screens dark and cracked. Strange machines, their purpose unclear, stood silent sentinel in the corners. The low hum we'd heard outside was louder now, a constant vibration that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It set my teeth on edge and made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. We moved deeper into the complex, checking rooms as we went. Most were empty, filled with nothing but dust and shadows. But as we progressed, we began to notice other things. Odd scratches on the walls, too deep and regular to be random. Patches of discoloration on the floor, dark stains that our imaginations filled in with grim possibilities. And always that incessant hum, growing louder with each step we took. It was in a room near the center of the complex that we found the first body. It was slumped in a corner, wearing the tattered remains of what might once have been a lab coat. As Doc knelt to examine it, I swept my rifle across the room, half expecting to see the killer lurking in the shadows. "What do we got, Doc?" Jonas asked, his voice low. Doc looked up, his face pale beneath his goggles. I'm not sure, Cap. This body, it's wrong." "Wrong how?" Axel asked, moving closer. "The proportions are off, the limbs are too long, the skull is misshapen, and the skin—" Doc swallowed hard. "It's not decomposing normally, it's like it's changing somehow." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool air of the underground complex. What the hell had we stumbled into? Before anyone could respond, a scream echoed through the corridors, a sound of pure terror that cut off abruptly, leaving only the endless hum in its wake. We looked at each other, our faces mirrors of shock and fear. Then, without a word, we moved towards the source of the scream, our training taking over despite the growing dread in our hearts. Whatever was waiting for us in the depths of this forsaken place, we would face it together. We were SEALs, the best of the best. We could handle anything. Or so we thought. The scream had come from somewhere deeper in the complex, beyond a set of heavy blast doors that looked out of place in the dilapidated surroundings. Unlike the rest of the base, these doors were pristine, their metal surface unmarred by rust or dust. The same strange symbols we'd seen on the entrance were etched into these doors as well, seeming to pulse with an inner light. "What the hell is this place?" Axel muttered, his normally confident voice tinged with unease. Jonas studied the doors for a moment, his face unreadable behind his night vision goggles. "I don't know," he admitted, "but our job is to find out. Ghost, see if you can get these doors open." Ghost nodded and moved forward, examining the control panel next to the doors. After a few moments of tinkering, he shook his head. "No good, Cap. This system's like nothing I've ever seen before. It's not responding to any of my usual tricks." "Stand back," Axel said, reaching for his pack. "I'll blow it." But before he could retrieve his explosives, the doors slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a long corridor beyond. The hum that had been our constant companion since entering the base grew louder, taking on a pulsing quality that made my head throb. We exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between us. Something was very wrong here, but we had a job to do. With a nod from Jonas, we moved forward into the corridor. The air grew colder as we descended, our breath forming small clouds in front of our faces. The walls here were different, smooth and slightly reflective, made of some material I couldn't identify. Our footsteps echoed strangely, as if the corridor was much larger than it appeared. We had gone perhaps 100 yards when Ghost, who was on point, suddenly stopped. "Cap," he said, his voice tight with tension, "you need to see this." We moved up to join him, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. The corridor opened up into a vast chamber, easily the size of a football field. But it was what filled that chamber that made my blood run cold. Rows upon rows of glass tubes lined the walls, each filled with a cloudy liquid, and floating in each tube was something. They might have once been human, but now they were twisted, changed, limbs elongated to impossible lengths, skin translucent and shot through with pulsing veins, heads swollen and misshapen. "My God," Doc whispered, his face pale. "What is this place?" Before anyone could answer, a voice spoke from the shadows. "Welcome, gentlemen. We've been expecting you." We spun as one, weapons raised, to face the source of the voice. A figure stepped into the light, tall and thin, with long spindly arms and a head that seemed too large for its body. Its skin was pale and slightly translucent, like the beings in the tubes, and its eyes were black pits that seemed to draw in the light around them. "Who are you?" Jonas demanded, his rifle trained on the figure's chest. "What is this place?" The figure smiled, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. "Who we are is not important. What is important is what we represent. The future, gentlemen. The next step in human evolution." "Evolution?" Axel spat. "This looks more like a nightmare to me." The figure's smile widened. But nightmares are just the mind's way of preparing for possibilities it cannot yet comprehend. And you, my friends, are about to comprehend a great deal." It raised a hand, and suddenly the air was filled with a high-pitched whine that cut through my skull like a knife. I stumbled, my vision blurring, and I could hear the others crying out in pain around me. Through the haze of agony, I saw more figures emerging from the shadows, moving with an unnatural grace. They surrounded us, their black eyes gleaming with an intelligence that was decidedly inhuman. "Don't fight it," the first figure said, its voice somehow cutting through the noise in my head. "Embrace the change. Become part of something greater than yourselves." I felt hands on my arms, cold and strong, pulling me towards one of the empty tubes. Through the pain and confusion, I heard Jonas's voice, shouting orders, trying to rally us. "Fight, damn it! We're SEALs! We don't go down like this!" His words cut through the fog in my mind, and I lashed out, breaking free from the grip of the creatures. I saw Axel nearby, his massive frame swinging wildly, sending two of the beings flying. Doc was on his knees, hands pressed to his ears, but at Jonas's words he too began to struggle. Ghost was nowhere to be seen. The battle that followed was like nothing I'd ever experienced. Our weapons seemed to have little effect on the creatures, but our hand-to-hand training proved useful. We fought with everything we had, driven by desperation and the primal need to survive. But we were outnumbered, and these beings were stronger and faster than any human. One by one, my team began to fall. I saw Doc go down, overwhelmed by a group of the creatures that dragged him towards the tubes. Axel lasted longer, his incredible strength keeping him in the fight, but eventually even he was subdued. I found myself back to back with Jonas, the two of us surrounded by a ring of the pale, inhuman figures. The leader watched from a distance, that terrible smile still on its face. "It's been a long time since we've had such entertaining specimens," it said. "Your resistance is admirable but futile. Why not join us willingly? The process is much less uncomfortable that way." "Go to hell," Jonas spat, his voice ragged with exertion. The creature's smile widened. "Oh, my dear Captain, we're already there." It raised its hand again, and the pain in my head intensified. I felt my knees buckle, and beside me, Jonas let out a strangled cry. As my vision began to fade, I saw Ghost emerge from the shadows behind the leader, a strange device in his hands. There was a flash of light, a sound like reality itself tearing apart, and then darkness. I woke up in a military hospital, my body aching and my mind reeling with fragmented memories of what had happened. Jonas was in the bed next to mine, his face pale and drawn. Of Axel and Doc, there was no sign. The official story was that we had stumbled upon a terrorist cell experimenting with chemical weapons. The base had been destroyed in an explosion, presumably triggered by the terrorists when they realized they had been discovered. Ghost was listed as killed in action, but Jonas and I knew the truth. We had seen things that defied explanation, horrors that haunted our dreams and made us question everything we thought we knew about the world. In the days and weeks that followed, we were debriefed countless times. Men in suits who never gave their names asked us the same questions over and over, probing for inconsistencies in our story. We stuck to the official version, knowing that the truth would sound too unbelievable. But late at night, when the hospital was quiet, Jonas and I would talk in whispers about what we had really seen, about the creatures that looked almost human but weren't, about the tubes filled with twisted, changing bodies, about the leader with its shark-like smile and eyes like black holes. And we would wonder about Ghost. Had he somehow escaped? Was the flash of light we saw some kind of weapon that destroyed the facility? Or had he been working for someone else all along, sent to make sure that whatever was in that base never saw the light of day? We never got answers to these questions. A month after the incident, Jonas disappeared. One day he was there, sitting in his hospital bed making plans for his recovery, and the next he was gone. No explanation, no trace left behind. It was as if he had never existed. I was discharged soon after with a commendation for bravery and a not-so-subtle suggestion that I retire. I took the hint, walking away from the only life I had ever known. For years I tried to forget what had happened in that desert. I moved to a small town, took up fishing, did my best to live a normal life. But the memories never faded. The nightmares never stopped. Sometimes I think I see them, a tall, thin figure at the edge of the crowd, a pair of two dark eyes watching me from across the street, a smile that's just a little too wide, with teeth that are just a little too sharp. And always in the back of my mind there's that hum, that low pulsing sound that I heard in the bass. It's as if it's calling to me, trying to pull me back to that place of horror and transformation. I don't know if what we saw that day was real, or if it was some kind of mass hallucination brought on by experimental weapons or desert-induced madness. Part of me hopes it wasn't real, that it was all just a terrible dream. But a larger part of me knows the truth, knows that out there in the vast emptiness of the Nevada desert, something waits. Something that isn't human, that perhaps never was human. Something that sees us not as enemies to be defeated, but as raw material to be reshaped. And I know that one day it will come for me. One day the hum in my head will grow too loud to ignore, and I'll find myself drawn back to that place, back to the tubes and the pain and the promise of becoming something both more and less than human. Until then, I'll keep telling my story. Not because I expect anyone to believe it, but because someone needs to know. Someone needs to be ready. Because if there's one thing I learned in that godforsaken base, it's this. The future is coming, whether we're ready for it or not, and it has teeth.